Imagine living your entire life inside a story that is constantly being narrated in your mind, a voice that judges you, doubts you, compares you, and keeps reminding you of everything that could go wrong, and yet you have never stopped to question whether that voice is actually you or just something you learned to believe. Most people never realize that they are not suffering because of their life, but because they are trapped inside this endless mental narration, replaying the past, fearing the future, and creating problems that do not even exist in the present moment. Buddhism reveals a truth that can completely change the way you experience your mind, and that truth is simple but deeply unsettling, because it forces you to look at something you have trusted your entire life. You are not the voice in your head, and you never were. The moment you begin to see this clearly, the control that your thoughts once had over you starts to weaken, and in that space, something powerful begins to emerge, a sense of calm, clarity, and freedom that was always there, hidden beneath the noise you never learned to question. 1. The voice is not you, the truth of no self. There is a subtle illusion that most people never question, and it is the belief that the voice inside their head is who they are, that the constant stream of thoughts, judgments, and inner commentary represents their true self. This illusion is so deeply ingrained that it feels natural, as if there is no separation between the thinker and the thoughts. However, Buddhism challenges this assumption by teaching the concept of no self, which does not mean that you do not exist, but that what you think of as your identity is not fixed, not solid, and not limited to the voice in your mind. If you observe your thoughts carefully, you will notice that they appear on their own, without your conscious effort, changing from moment to moment, sometimes contradicting each other, sometimes disappearing completely. If you were truly your thoughts, you would have full control over them, but the reality is that they arise and pass away like waves in the ocean. This means that the voice you hear is not you, but something that is happening within you. When you begin to see this clearly, you stop taking every thought personally, and you stop reacting to every mental narrative as if it defines you. This creates a powerful sense of space within your awareness, where you can observe your mind without being trapped inside it. In that space, you begin to experience a deeper sense of freedom, because you are no longer identified with the endless noise of thinking. 2. The truth about suffering that nobody wants to hear. One of the most difficult truths to accept is that much of your suffering is not only caused by what happens to you, but by the way your mind reacts to it afterward. What hurts you is often not just the event itself, but how you interpret it, how you resist it, and how you keep replaying it again and again in your thoughts. This idea can feel uncomfortable because it challenges the belief that all your pain comes from outside, as if life is simply doing things to you. But Buddhism gently points out something deeper, that suffering grows not just from the event, but from the relationship you build with that event in your mind. When something painful happens, your first reaction is natural and human. You may feel hurt, disappointed, or confused, and that part is unavoidable. However, what happens next is where suffering starts to increase. The mind begins to create stories, asking questions like, "Why did this happen to me?" Or, "What if it happens again?" Or, "I should have done something differently." These thoughts do not solve the problem, but they keep the pain alive. Instead of letting the moment pass, you hold on to it, replaying it in different ways, imagining worse outcomes, or blaming yourself or others. Over time, the original event becomes smaller than the story you keep repeating about it. A single moment turns into hours or even days of mental suffering, not because the event is still happening, but because your mind keeps bringing it back. This is how a short experience becomes a long emotional burden. The truth that nobody wants to hear is that this cycle is not completely out of your control. You may not choose what happens to you, but you often unknowingly choose to keep engaging with the thoughts that follow. And while this realization may feel uncomfortable at first, it is also powerful because it means you are not helpless. The moment you become aware of this pattern, you create a small gap between you and your thoughts. And in that gap, you begin to see that freedom does not come from controlling everything in life, but from changing how you respond to what life brings. 3. You are feeding it, the truth of mental nourishment. Your mind works in a very simple but powerful way, which most people never notice. And that is this: whatever you give your attention to, you slowly make stronger. Thoughts are not just random things that appear and disappear without effect. They grow based on how much time and energy you give them. If you keep returning to a negative thought, thinking about it again and again, you are quietly feeding it, making it more familiar, more automatic, and more powerful in your mind. For example, if you keep thinking about something that went wrong, your mind will start to find more reasons why it was bad, more details to focus on, and more emotions to attach to it. Even if the situation is already over, your mind continues to relive it, as if it is still happening. The same thing happens with fear. The more you imagine something going wrong in the future, the more real that fear begins to feel, even though it has not happened yet. Buddhism teaches that your thoughts are like seeds, and your attention is like water. Whatever you water will grow. If you constantly water fear, doubt, and negativity, those patterns will become stronger and more natural over time. But if you become aware of where your attention is going, you begin to see that you have a choice, not in stopping thoughts completely, but in deciding which ones you continue to feed. This does not mean forcing yourself to be positive or ignoring problems. It simply means not giving unnecessary energy to thoughts that create suffering. When you stop feeding negative patterns with constant attention, they slowly begin to lose their strength. And as they lose strength, your mind becomes calmer, clearer, and easier to manage, not because you controlled it, but because you stopped nourishing what was hurting you. 4. Your mind is addicted to negativity. There is something important you need to understand about your mind, something that can completely change the way you see your thoughts once you truly realize it. And that is this: your mind is not naturally designed to make you feel peaceful, happy, or calm, but to keep you alert, cautious, and constantly aware of potential danger. This means that your brain has a built-in tendency to focus more on what is wrong than what is right, more on what could go wrong than what is already going well, and more on problems than on peace. This is not because you are weak, broken, or overly negative, but because your mind has been conditioned over thousands of years to prioritize survival over happiness. In the past, this way of thinking was necessary because being aware of danger meant staying alive. If your ancestors ignored potential threats, they would not survive long enough to pass on their genes. So the brain evolved to constantly scan the environment, looking for risks, problems, and anything that might harm you. Even today, your mind still operates in this same way, even though your daily life is no longer filled with the same kind of life-threatening dangers. Instead of protecting you from wild animals or physical threats, your mind now reacts to social situations, memories, and imagined futures as if they are equally dangerous. This is why one negative comment can stay in your mind for hours, while 10 positive ones are quickly forgotten. This is why your mind replays embarrassing moments from years ago, even though they no longer matter. This is why you often feel anxious about things that have not even happened yet. Your mind is trying to protect you, but in doing so, it creates unnecessary stress and suffering by constantly focusing on what might go wrong instead of allowing you to experience what is already okay. Over time, this pattern becomes so familiar that it starts to feel normal, almost like your mind is addicted to negativity. You begin to expect problems, search for flaws, and assume the worst, even in situations where nothing is actually wrong. You may find yourself overthinking simple situations, imagining negative outcomes, or doubting yourself without clear reason. The more you follow these thoughts, the more your brain strengthens this habit, making negativity feel automatic and unavoidable. However, Buddhism offers a powerful shift in perspective, which is not about forcing your mind to become positive or trying to eliminate negative thoughts completely, but about becoming aware of how your mind operates. When you begin to observe your thoughts without immediately reacting to them, you start to notice patterns. You begin to see how your mind jumps to conclusions, how it exaggerates problems, and how it creates stories that are not always based on reality. This awareness is where change begins, because the moment you recognize that your mind is biased toward negativity, you stop blindly trusting every thought it produces. You start asking yourself whether a thought is actually useful, or simply a reflection of your mind's habit of focusing on problems. You begin to see that not every thought deserves your attention, and not every fear deserves your belief. As you continue to practice this awareness, something slowly shifts within you. The thoughts may still appear, but they no longer control you in the same way. You are able to notice them without being pulled into them, to see them without becoming them. This creates a sense of space between you and your thinking, and in that space, you begin to experience a different kind of freedom, one where your mind is no longer constantly dragging you into negativity, but becomes something you can observe with calmness and clarity. The goal is not to make your mind perfect, because that is not possible, but to understand it so deeply that its patterns no longer dominate your experience. And once you reach that understanding, you realize something powerful, which is that your mind may have a tendency toward negativity, but you do not have to follow it, believe it, or live inside it. 5. The present moment has no problem. The truth of now there is a quiet truth about your life that is always available, yet rarely noticed, because your mind is almost never still enough to see it clearly. And that truth is this: in most moments, right here and right now, there is actually no real problem. What you are experiencing as stress, anxiety, or pressure is often not coming from what is happening in front of you, but from what your mind is thinking about what has already happened or what might happen next. Your body may be sitting in a safe place, your surroundings may be calm, and nothing urgent may be happening, yet your mind can create a sense of urgency, tension, and discomfort simply through the thoughts it produces. This is because the mind rarely stays in the present moment. It moves constantly between the past and the future, replaying old memories, analyzing past mistakes, imagining different outcomes, or projecting fears about what could go wrong. When you think about something painful from the past, your body reacts as if it is happening again, bringing back the same emotions, the same tension, and the same discomfort. When you think about a possible problem in the future, your mind treats it as if it is already real, creating anxiety even though nothing has actually happened yet. In this way, your mind creates problems that do not exist in the present moment and then reacts to them as if they are real. Buddhism teaches that suffering often comes from this disconnection from the present, from living in mental time instead of real time. The present moment itself is usually simple, direct, and manageable. But the moment you leave it through thought, you enter a world of stories, assumptions, and imagined scenarios. These mental constructions can feel very real, but they are not the same as what is actually happening in front of you. This is why you can feel overwhelmed, even when nothing is immediately wrong, because your mind is dealing with a version of reality that exists only in thought. When you bring your attention back to the present moment, something begins to change. You start to notice your breathing, your surroundings, the simple reality of where you are and what is happening right now. In that awareness, the intensity of your thoughts begins to decrease because you are no longer feeding them with constant attention. You begin to see that many of the problems your mind creates are not present realities, but imagined extensions of past or future thinking. This does not mean that life has no challenges or that you should ignore real responsibilities. It means that most of your suffering is not coming from what is happening right now, but from how your mind is interacting with time. When you deal with life one moment at a time, problems become clearer, smaller, and easier to handle. But when you carry the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future at the same time, everything feels heavier than it actually is. The truth of the present moment is not that it will solve all your problems instantly, but that it gives you a place of stability where your mind can rest. It shows you that beneath all the noise of thinking, there is a simple awareness that is not overwhelmed, not anxious, and not lost in endless stories. The more you return to this awareness, the more you realize that peace is not something you need to create, but something that is already there when you are not caught in your thoughts. Over time, this understanding becomes a powerful shift in the way you live your life. Instead of constantly being pulled into past regrets or future fears, you begin to stay grounded in what is actually happening. You respond to life instead of reacting to imagined scenarios. You experience moments more fully instead of thinking your way through them. And slowly, you begin to understand that while your mind may continue to move through time, your peace is always found in the present. The present moment does not demand that you solve your entire life at once. It only asks you to be here, to see clearly, and to deal with what is in front of you without adding unnecessary mental weight. And when you learn to live this way, even briefly, you begin to feel a kind of calm that is not dependent on circumstances, but rooted in awareness itself. 6. The wound wants compassion, not war. The truth of metta. There is a silent struggle happening inside most people that they rarely speak about, and it is not just the pain they feel, but the way they fight against that pain as if it is something that should not exist. Whenever you feel sadness, fear, insecurity, or emotional discomfort, your first instinct is often not to understand it, but to push it away, to fix it immediately, or to judge yourself for feeling it in the first place. This creates a hidden conflict within you, where one part of you is hurting and another part is trying to control, suppress, or eliminate that hurt. Over time, this internal resistance turns your mind into a battlefield where instead of healing, you are constantly at war with your own experience. Buddhism teaches something very different, something that can feel unfamiliar at first, because it goes against the way most people have been conditioned to deal with their emotions. It teaches that your pain is not your enemy, and your wounds are not problems to be attacked, but experiences that are asking for understanding, attention, and compassion. This is the essence of metta, or loving kindness, which is not just about being kind to others, but about developing a deep sense of kindness toward yourself, especially in moments when you are struggling the most. When you feel emotional pain, it is often because something within you is wounded, not in a physical sense, but in an emotional or psychological way. It could be a memory, a fear, a feeling of rejection, or a sense of not being enough. Instead of meeting this wound with care, most people react with judgment, telling themselves that they should not feel this way, that they are weak, or that they need to get over it quickly. This reaction only adds another layer of suffering, because now you are not only feeling pain, but also criticizing yourself for feeling it. Imagine a child who is hurt and crying, and instead of comforting that child, you start shouting at them to stop crying, telling them they are being weak or dramatic. This would only make the situation worse, because the child would feel both the original pain and the lack of support. In the same way, when you treat your own emotions with harshness, you deepen your suffering instead of healing it. The wound does not need to be attacked. It needs to be acknowledged and understood. When you begin to approach your emotions with compassion, something begins to shift. Instead of resisting what you feel, you allow it to be there without immediately trying to change it. You recognize that this feeling is a part of your experience, not something that defines you, but something that is passing through you. You begin to say to yourself, in a quiet and honest way, "This is what I am feeling right now, and it is okay to feel this." This simple act of acceptance reduces the intensity of the emotion because you are no longer adding resistance on top of it. Compassion does not mean that you stay stuck in your pain or that you avoid growth. It means that you create a safe inner space where healing can take place. When you stop fighting your emotions, you begin to understand them. You start to see where they come from, what triggers them, and what they are trying to tell you. Many emotions are not random. They are signals pointing to something deeper, something that needs attention rather than suppression. For example, feelings of anxiety may be connected to fear of uncertainty or lack of control, while feelings of sadness may be connected to loss or unmet expectations. When you meet these feelings with compassion instead of resistance, you allow them to move through you naturally, rather than getting stuck and repeating themselves. This is why compassion is so powerful, because it transforms your relationship with your emotions, turning them from enemies into teachers. Metta also involves speaking to yourself in a different way, replacing harsh inner dialogue with words of understanding and care. Instead of saying, "Why am I like this?" you begin to say, "I am going through something difficult, and I will support myself through it." Instead of saying, "I should not feel this way," you say, "It is human to feel this way, and I will give myself the space to process it." This shift may seem small, but over time, it creates a completely different internal environment, one where you feel supported rather than attacked by your own mind. As you continue to practice this, you begin to notice that your emotional experiences become less overwhelming, not because they disappear completely, but because you are no longer amplifying them through resistance and self-judgment. You become more patient with yourself, more understanding of your own struggles, and more capable of staying present even when things feel difficult. This does not make you weak. It makes you stronger in a deeper and more stable way, because your strength is no longer based on suppression, but on awareness and acceptance. Another important aspect of compassion is recognizing that you are not alone in your experiences. The emotions you feel, the struggles you go through, and the challenges you face are part of the shared human experience. Everyone feels pain, everyone experiences doubt, and everyone goes through moments of difficulty. When you understand this, you stop isolating yourself in your suffering, and you begin to see that your experience is not something to be ashamed of, but something to be understood with kindness. Over time, this practice of compassion begins to transform not only how you treat yourself, but also how you respond to others. When you become less harsh with your own emotions, you naturally become more patient and understanding with the emotions of others. You realize that just as you are dealing with your own inner struggles, others are dealing with theirs, even if you cannot see it. This creates a deeper sense of connection and empathy, reducing conflict and increasing understanding in your relationships. The truth of metta is not about becoming perfect or eliminating all negative emotions, but about changing the way you relate to those emotions. It is about moving from a place of resistance to a place of acceptance, from self-criticism to self-compassion, and from inner conflict to inner support. This shift does not happen overnight, but with consistent practice, it becomes a natural part of how you experience yourself and the world. In the end, you begin to realize something very important, which is that your healing does not come from fighting your pain, but from understanding it. Not from rejecting your emotions, but from embracing them with awareness and care. The wound does not need war, it needs compassion. And when you give yourself that compassion, you create the conditions for real and lasting transformation. 7. The path is the practice, the truth of constant return. There is a quiet misunderstanding that lives in the minds of most people when they begin any journey of growth, healing, or self-discovery. And it is the belief that one day they will reach a point where everything becomes easy, where their mind becomes completely calm, where negative thoughts disappear, and where they finally feel like they have arrived. This idea creates an invisible pressure, because every time the mind becomes restless again, every time old patterns return, and every time emotions feel overwhelming, it feels like failure, as if all progress has been lost. But Buddhism reveals something very different, something that changes the entire way you approach your mind, and that is this: there is no final moment of arrival, because the path itself is the practice, and the practice is the path. Your mind is not something that you fix once and then forget about. It is something that is constantly moving, constantly changing, and constantly influenced by your experiences, your environment, and your awareness. There will be days when you feel clear, calm, and in control, and there will be days when your mind feels noisy, distracted, and difficult to manage. This is not a sign that you are doing something wrong, but a reflection of the natural rhythm of being human. The mistake most people make is expecting perfection, expecting a permanent state of peace, and when that does not happen, they become frustrated and give up. The truth is that progress does not come from never losing focus, but from learning how to return to it again and again, no matter how many times you drift away. Every time you notice that your mind has wandered into negative thinking, every time you catch yourself overthinking, and every time you bring your attention back to the present moment, you are strengthening something deeper than control. You are strengthening awareness. This act of returning may seem small, almost insignificant, but it is the foundation of real change. Think of it like training a muscle. You do not become stronger by lifting weight once, but by repeating the movement over and over again. In the same way, you do not develop a calm and clear mind by having one moment of awareness, but by returning to awareness repeatedly, even when it feels difficult, even when you feel distracted, and even when you feel like nothing is changing. Each return is a step forward, even if it does not feel like it in the moment. One of the most powerful shifts you can make is to stop seeing distraction as failure and start seeing it as part of the practice. When your mind drifts, it gives you an opportunity to notice it and come back. Without distraction, there would be no returning, and without returning, there would be no growth. This changes your relationship with your thoughts, because instead of becoming frustrated when your mind becomes noisy, you begin to see it as a natural process that allows you to deepen your awareness. There will be moments when you feel completely present, where your mind is quiet, and where everything feels clear and simple. These moments are important, not because they are permanent, but because they show you what is possible. However, the goal is not to hold on to these moments or try to make them last forever, because the more you try to control your mind, the more tension you create. Instead, the practice is to experience these moments fully when they come, and to return gently when they pass. The idea of constant return also applies to your emotional state. There will be times when you feel strong, confident, and balanced, and there will be times when you feel uncertain, overwhelmed, or disconnected. The path is not about avoiding these difficult states, but about learning how to return to yourself even when you are in them. This means returning to your breath, returning to your awareness, returning to compassion, and returning to the understanding that your current state does not define you. Over time, this practice creates a deep sense of stability within you. Not a stability that comes from controlling everything, but a stability that comes from knowing that no matter what happens, you can always return. You may lose clarity, but you can return to it. You may get caught in negative thinking, but you can step out of it. You may feel overwhelmed, but you can come back to a place of awareness. This understanding creates a quiet confidence, because you are no longer afraid of your own mind. Another important part of this truth is letting go of the idea that progress should be linear. Growth is not a straight line where each day is better than the last. It moves in cycles, with moments of clarity followed by moments of confusion, moments of peace followed by moments of restlessness. When you understand this, you stop judging your journey based on temporary states, and you begin to trust the process itself. The path is not about becoming someone new, but about uncovering what has always been there beneath the noise of your thoughts. Beneath the constant movement of your mind, there is a quiet awareness that is always present, always stable, and always untouched by the content of your thinking. This awareness is not something you create, but something you return to. The more you return to it, the more familiar it becomes, and the more it begins to guide the way you experience life. As this awareness strengthens, you begin to notice that your thoughts no longer have the same power over you. They still arise, but they pass more easily. Your emotions still come and go, but they do not overwhelm you in the same way. You begin to respond to situations with more clarity and less reaction, not because you have eliminated negativity, but because you are no longer identified with it. The truth of constant return is not about perfection, but about patience. It is about understanding that change takes time, and that every small moment of awareness contributes to a larger transformation. Even when it feels like nothing is happening, something is changing beneath the surface. Your relationship with your mind is shifting, your awareness is growing, and your ability to remain present is strengthening. There will be days when you forget everything you have learned, when you get lost in your thoughts, and when you feel like you have gone backwards. In those moments, the practice is simple, but not always easy. Return. Return without judgment, return without frustration, and return without the need to be perfect. Just come back to this moment, to your breath, to your awareness. And each time you do this, you are reminding yourself of something very important, which is that you are not your thoughts, you are not your emotions, and you are not the temporary states that come and go. You are the awareness that notices them, the space in which they appear, and the presence that remains when they pass. In the end, you begin to realize that freedom is not something you reach at the end of the journey, but something you experience in the act of returning itself. Every time you come back to awareness, you are stepping out of the illusion of being lost in your mind and into the reality of being present. Every time you return, you reconnect with a part of yourself that is calm, stable, and free. The path is not somewhere far away, and it is not something you achieve once and for all. It is here, in this moment, in your ability to notice, to return, and to begin again. And no matter how many times you lose your way, the truth remains the same. You can always come back. 8. Awareness is freedom, the truth that changes everything there. Is a moment in every person's life, whether they recognize it or not, where they begin to sense that something is not quite right, not in the world, but within themselves. It is a subtle feeling, a quiet realization that despite achieving things, despite trying to improve, despite thinking more, doing more, and chasing more, there is still a kind of restlessness that does not fully go away. This restlessness is not caused by a lack of success or a lack of effort, but by something much deeper, something that cannot be solved by external changes alone. It comes from being unconsciously controlled by your own mind, from living inside patterns of thinking that you never chose, and from reacting to life without truly seeing what is happening within you. Most people spend their lives trying to fix their thoughts, control their emotions, and improve their situations, believing that if they can just think better, feel better, or achieve more, they will finally experience peace. But this approach often leads to more struggle, because the more you try to control your mind, the more you become entangled in it. You start fighting your thoughts, resisting your emotions, and trying to force yourself into a state that feels better, but this only creates more tension. Buddhism offers a completely different understanding, one that shifts the focus from control to awareness, and this shift changes everything. Awareness is not about stopping your thoughts or eliminating your emotions. It is about seeing them clearly, without immediately reacting to them, without identifying with them, and without trying to change them right away. It is the ability to observe what is happening within you in the same way you would observe something outside of you, with clarity, curiosity, and without judgment. This may sound simple, but it is one of the most powerful transformations a person can experience, because it breaks the automatic cycle of reaction that keeps you trapped in your own mind. When you are not aware, your thoughts control you without resistance. A negative thought appears, and you believe it. An emotion arises, and you become overwhelmed by it. A memory surfaces, and you relive it as if it is happening again. In this state, you are not choosing your experience, you are being driven by it. Your mind becomes the one in control, and you follow wherever it leads, even if it takes you into anxiety, fear, or unnecessary suffering. But the moment awareness enters the picture, something begins to change. You start to notice your thoughts instead of being lost in them. You begin to see your emotions as experiences rather than identities. You recognize patterns that you were previously unconscious of, and in that recognition, you create space. This space is where freedom begins, because it allows you to pause before reacting, to see clearly before responding, and to choose how you engage with your experience. This does not mean that negative thoughts or difficult emotions will stop appearing. They will still come, because they are part of the human experience. However, they no longer have the same power over you, because you are no longer fully identified with them. Instead of saying, "I am anxious," you begin to see that anxiety is present. Instead of believing, "This thought is true," you begin to recognize that this is just a thought. This subtle shift changes everything because it separates you from your mental activity, allowing you to observe it without being consumed by it. One of the most important aspects of awareness is that it is always available to you, regardless of your situation. You do not need special conditions, perfect circumstances, or a completely calm mind to practice awareness. In fact, it becomes most powerful in moments of difficulty, when your thoughts are loud and your emotions are strong. In those moments, instead of trying to escape what you are feeling, you turn toward it with awareness, noticing what is happening without judgment. This alone begins to reduce the intensity of your experience because you are no longer adding resistance to it. Awareness also reveals something that most people never see clearly, which is how repetitive and predictable the mind can be. You begin to notice that many of your thoughts are not new, but repeated patterns that have been playing for years. The same worries, the same fears, the same self-doubts appear again and again, as if your mind is stuck in a loop. When you are not aware, these patterns feel real and important, but when you observe them, you start to see that they are simply habits of thinking, not absolute truths. As this understanding deepens, you begin to trust your awareness more than your thoughts. You realize that your thoughts are influenced by your past, your conditioning, and your emotional state, while your awareness is stable, present, and clear. This creates a shift in where you place your identity. Instead of identifying with every thought and emotion, you begin to identify with the awareness that notices them. This awareness does not judge, does not react, and does not suffer in the same way your thinking mind does. It simply observes. Over time, this practice of awareness transforms your entire relationship with your mind. Situations that once triggered strong reactions begin to feel more manageable. Thoughts that once felt overwhelming begin to pass more easily. Emotions that once controlled you begin to move through you without getting stuck. This does not mean that life becomes perfect or that you never experience difficulty, but it means that you are no longer controlled by your internal reactions in the same way. Another important realization is that awareness itself is peaceful. It does not need to create peace, because it is already free from the noise of thinking. When you rest in awareness, even briefly, you experience a sense of calm that is not dependent on your thoughts being positive or your circumstances being ideal. This calmness is always there, but it is often hidden beneath the constant activity of the mind. The more you practice awareness, the more you begin to access this underlying peace. This is why awareness is often described as freedom, not because it removes all challenges from your life, but because it changes the way you experience those challenges. Instead of being trapped in cycles of reaction, you begin to move through life with greater clarity, presence, and understanding. You respond instead of reacting, observe instead of assuming, and allow instead of resisting. The journey of awareness is not about becoming someone new, but about seeing clearly what has always been there. It is about recognizing that beneath all your thoughts, emotions, and mental patterns, there is a deeper presence that is not disturbed by every passing experience. This presence is who you truly are, not the voice in your head, not the stories you tell yourself, but the awareness that notices it all. As you continue to practice this, you begin to realize that freedom is not something you need to search for in the future, but something that becomes available in the present moment through awareness. Every time you notice your thoughts, every time you observe your emotions without reacting, and every time you return to the present moment, you are stepping into that freedom. And the more you return to this awareness, the more natural it becomes, until one day you begin to live from it, not as a practice, but as a way of being. 9. Let it pass, the truth of impermanence. There is a quiet law that governs everything in your life, a truth so constant that it is always happening, yet so subtle that most people rarely notice it deeply, and that truth is this: everything changes, everything moves, and nothing stays the same. Every thought that appears in your mind, every emotion that rises in your body, every situation you experience, and every phase of your life is temporary, constantly shifting from one moment to the next. This truth is known in Buddhism as impermanence, and understanding it is one of the most powerful ways to free yourself from unnecessary suffering. The difficulty is not that things change, but that your mind resists this change. You want pleasant experiences to last forever, and you want painful experiences to disappear immediately. You hold on to what feels good, and you push away what feels uncomfortable. This constant grasping and resisting creates tension within you, because you are trying to control something that cannot be controlled. Life is always moving, always evolving, and when your mind tries to stop that movement, it creates frustration, anxiety, and suffering. When a negative thought appears, your first instinct is often to fight it, to get rid of it as quickly as possible, or to analyze it until you feel in control again. But this reaction actually gives the thought more energy, making it stronger and more persistent. The more you resist a thought, the more attention you give it, and the more it stays in your mind. In the same way, when you try to hold on to positive experiences, you create fear of losing them, which turns even happiness into a source of anxiety. Buddhism teaches that the key is not to control what arises, but to understand its nature. Everything that appears in your experience, whether it is a thought, an emotion, or a situation, has one common quality: it will pass. No matter how intense a feeling is, no matter how strong a thought seems, and no matter how permanent something feels in the moment, it is already changing, already moving, already on its way to disappearing. Think about a moment when you felt overwhelmed by emotion, a time when it seemed like the feeling would never end. At that moment, it felt permanent, as if it defined your entire experience. But if you look back now, you can see that it changed, that it faded, and that it eventually passed. This is the nature of all experiences. They arise, they stay for a while, and then they dissolve. The problem is that when you are inside the experience, you forget this truth. Your mind tells you that this feeling will last forever, that this problem will never end, and that this situation defines your reality. You become caught in the intensity of the moment, losing sight of the fact that it is temporary. This is where suffering deepens, because you are not just experiencing the emotion, you are believing in its permanence. When you begin to understand impermanence, your relationship with your thoughts and emotions starts to change. Instead of reacting immediately, you begin to observe them with a sense of patience. When a negative thought appears, you do not need to fight it or follow it. You can simply notice it and allow it to be there, knowing that it will pass. When an uncomfortable emotion arises, you do not need to escape it or suppress it. You can feel it fully while understanding that it is not permanent. This does not mean that you become passive or that you ignore your experiences. It means that you stop adding unnecessary resistance to what is already happening. You allow the natural process of change to take place without interfering with it. This creates a sense of ease, because you are no longer trying to hold on to or push away every experience. One of the most powerful effects of understanding impermanence is that it reduces fear. Much of your anxiety comes from the belief that negative situations will last forever, that pain will never end, or that you will always feel the way you do in a difficult moment. When you see clearly that everything is temporary, this fear begins to weaken. You realize that no matter how intense something feels, it is part of a process that is already moving and changing. At the same time, impermanence also deepens your appreciation for positive experiences. When you understand that good moments are also temporary, you begin to experience them more fully, without taking them for granted. Instead of clinging to them or worrying about losing them, you allow yourself to be present with them, knowing that their beauty comes from their fleeting nature. Another important aspect of impermanence is how it applies to your identity. Many people believe that they are fixed in a certain way, that they are always anxious, always overthinking, or always stuck in certain patterns. But just like thoughts and emotions, your sense of self is also constantly changing. The person you were in the past is not the same person you are now, and the person you are now will continue to evolve. This means that no matter how stuck you feel, change is always possible, because nothing about you is permanent. As you begin to live with this understanding, you develop a different kind of strength, one that is not based on controlling life, but on flowing with it. When difficulties arise, you remind yourself that they will pass. When your mind becomes noisy, you remember that the thoughts will change. When emotions feel overwhelming, you trust that they will move through you if you allow them to. This creates a sense of stability, not because everything stays the same, but because you understand that everything changes. The practice of letting things pass is not about doing nothing, but about not interfering with the natural movement of your experience. It is about allowing thoughts to come and go without attaching to them, allowing emotions to rise and fall without resisting them, and allowing life to unfold without trying to control every moment. This does not make you weak. It makes you flexible, adaptable, and deeply aligned with the reality of how life works. There will still be moments when you forget this truth, when you get caught in your thoughts, when you resist your emotions, and when you feel overwhelmed. This is natural, and it is part of the process. The practice is to remember again, to return to the understanding that whatever you are experiencing is temporary, and to allow it to pass without adding extra layers of resistance. Over time, this understanding becomes more natural, and you begin to move through life with greater ease. You are no longer as afraid of your thoughts, because you know they will change. You are no longer as overwhelmed by your emotions, because you trust that they will pass. You are no longer as attached to outcomes, because you understand that everything is in motion. In the end, the truth of impermanence is not something to fear, but something that brings freedom. It shows you that no matter what you are going through, it is not fixed, it is not permanent, and it is not the final state of your life. Everything is moving, everything is changing, and everything is passing. And when you truly understand this, you begin to let go, not because you have to, but because you see clearly that there is nothing to hold on to. 10. Stop identifying with the mind, the truth of inner separation. There is a subtle but powerful habit that shapes almost every part of your experience, and most people are completely unaware of it. And that habit is the constant identification with the mind. From the moment you wake up to the moment you fall asleep, your thoughts are running, commenting, judging, remembering, predicting, and creating a continuous stream of mental activity. Without realizing it, you have been trained to believe that this stream of thinking is who you are, that your thoughts represent your identity, your truth, and your reality. This belief is so deeply rooted that it feels natural, almost impossible to question, and yet it is one of the main reasons why you feel trapped inside your own mind. When a thought appears saying, "You are not good enough," you do not see it as just a thought. You feel as if it is a statement about who you are. When your mind tells you something bad is going to happen, you do not recognize it as a mental projection. You react as if it is a real and immediate danger. When your thoughts replay past mistakes, you begin to feel guilt and regret, as if those moments are happening again in the present. This is what identification looks like. It is the merging of your awareness with your thoughts, where there is no distance between you and what your mind is producing. The problem is not that thoughts exist, because thinking is a natural function of the mind, just like the heart beating or the lungs breathing. The problem is that you believe every thought without question, and in doing so, you allow your mind to define your entire experience. This creates a situation where your emotional state is constantly controlled by your thoughts, where your sense of self is shaped by mental patterns, and where your life is influenced more by your internal narratives than by actual reality. Buddhism introduces a powerful shift, which is the understanding that you are not your thoughts, but the awareness that observes them. This may sound simple, but it is one of the most transformative realizations you can have, because it creates a separation between you and your mind. This separation does not mean that you stop thinking or that your thoughts disappear, but that you no longer become completely absorbed in them. Instead of being inside your thoughts, you begin to observe them from a place of awareness. When you start to practice this, you begin to notice something very important, which is that your thoughts arise on their own. You do not consciously choose every thought that appears. They simply come and go, often without any clear reason. Some thoughts are helpful, some are neutral, and some are negative, but all of them share one quality: they are temporary. If you watch closely, you will see that thoughts appear, stay for a moment, and then disappear, only to be replaced by new ones. This constant movement shows that thoughts are not stable and therefore cannot define who you are. However, when you identify with your thoughts, you treat them as if they are permanent and meaningful reflections of your identity. You start to build a sense of self around them, believing that your thoughts represent who you are as a person. This creates a fragile identity, because your thoughts are always changing, which means your sense of self becomes unstable and easily influenced by whatever is happening in your mind. The moment you create separation between you and your thoughts, this begins to change. Instead of saying, "I am anxious," you begin to see that anxiety is present. Instead of saying, "I am a failure," you recognize that this is a thought about failure. This shift may seem small, but it creates a powerful difference, because it removes the identification between you and the thought. You are no longer the thought. You are the one observing it. This separation gives you something that most people do not have, which is choice. When you are identified with your mind, you react automatically to every thought, following wherever it leads. But when you are aware of your thoughts, you can choose whether to engage with them or let them pass. You are no longer controlled by every mental impulse, and this creates a sense of freedom that is not dependent on your thoughts being positive or negative. At first, this may feel difficult, because your mind is used to operating automatically, and it may continue to pull you back into identification. You may find yourself getting lost in thoughts again and again, reacting emotionally and forgetting to observe. This is not failure, it is part of the process. Each time you notice that you have become identified with a thought and bring your awareness back, you are strengthening this separation. Over time, this becomes more natural, and you begin to spend more time observing your thoughts rather than being controlled by them. Another important aspect of this truth is understanding that your thoughts are influenced by many factors that are not always accurate. Reflections of reality. Your past experiences, your conditioning, your emotional state, and even your physical condition can all affect the type of thoughts that arise in your mind. This means that your thoughts are not always reliable, and treating them as absolute truth can lead to unnecessary suffering. For example, when you are tired, stressed, or overwhelmed, your thoughts are more likely to be negative or distorted. In these moments, your mind may tell you things that are not true, but because you are identified with those thoughts, you believe them and react accordingly. When you create separation, you begin to see that these thoughts are influenced by your state, and you no longer take them as seriously. As this awareness deepens, you begin to experience your mind in a different way. Thoughts still arise, but they no longer have the same emotional charge. They pass more quickly, and you are less likely to get stuck in them. Your emotional reactions become less intense because you are not amplifying them through identification. You begin to feel a sense of calm, not because your mind is completely quiet, but because you are no longer trapped inside it. This shift also changes the way you experience challenges in life. When something difficult happens, your mind will still produce thoughts about it, but instead of becoming overwhelmed, you are able to observe those thoughts and respond more clearly. You are no longer reacting based on automatic patterns, but responding with awareness and understanding. Over time, this practice creates a deeper sense of identity, one that is not based on your thoughts, your emotions, or your external circumstances, but on the awareness that is always present. This awareness does not change in the same way your thoughts do. It is stable, calm, and unaffected by the constant movement of your mind. When you begin to identify with this awareness instead of your thoughts, you experience a different kind of peace, one that is not dependent on what is happening in your mind. The truth of inner separation is not about rejecting your thoughts or trying to eliminate them, but about understanding their nature and your relationship to them. It is about seeing clearly that your thoughts are something you experience, not something you are. This understanding creates a sense of freedom that cannot be taken away by changing thoughts, because it is rooted in awareness itself. There will still be moments when you get lost in your mind, when you identify with your thoughts, and when you feel overwhelmed. This is natural, and it is part of being human. The practice is not to avoid these moments, but to notice them when they happen and gently return to awareness. Each time you do this, you strengthen your ability to remain separate from your thoughts. In the end, you begin to realize that your mind is not your master, but a tool, something that can be used when needed, but not something that needs to control your entire experience. You are not the voice in your head, you are the one who hears it. You are not the thoughts that come and go, you are the awareness in which they appear. And when you truly understand this, you begin to experience a level of freedom that most people spend their entire lives searching for, not by changing your thoughts, but by no longer being controlled by them. 11. You don't control thoughts, you control attention. There is a belief that most people carry without ever questioning it, and that belief is that if they could just control their thoughts, everything in their life would finally become calm, clear, and peaceful. They believe that the reason they feel anxious, overwhelmed, or stuck is because their mind is out of control, and that the solution is to force their thoughts to become positive, quiet, or perfectly aligned with what they want. This belief creates a silent struggle, because the more they try to control their thinking, the more they realize how little control they actually have. If you observe your mind carefully, you will notice something surprising, which is that thoughts appear on their own, without asking for your permission. A random memory can come into your mind, a worry can suddenly arise, or a negative idea can appear even when you are trying to think positively. You do not sit down and consciously choose every thought that enters your mind. They simply show up, influenced by your past experiences, your emotional state, and countless factors that are outside your direct control. This realization can feel frustrating at first, because it challenges the idea that you should be able to fully control your mind. However, Buddhism offers a different perspective, one that shifts your focus from controlling thoughts to understanding attention. You may not have control over which thoughts appear, but you do have influence over which thoughts you continue to engage with. This distinction is subtle but incredibly powerful, because it changes the way you relate to your mind. Instead of fighting against thoughts, you begin to work with your attention, directing it in a way that reduces unnecessary suffering. Your attention is like a spotlight that highlights whatever it focuses on. When a thought appears, it is like something entering a dark room. If you shine your attention on it, it becomes clearer, stronger, and more important. If you keep your attention on it, it grows, expanding into more thoughts, more emotions, and more mental activity. But if you do not continue to focus on it, it begins to fade into the background, losing its intensity and eventually disappearing. Most people are not aware of how they use their attention. When a negative thought appears, they immediately focus on it, analyze it, and follow it, without realizing that they are feeding it with their attention. This creates a chain reaction where one thought leads to another, and before they know it, they are lost in a loop of overthinking. They may believe that the thought is controlling them, but in reality, it is their attention that is giving the thought its power. For example, if a thought appears saying, "What if something goes wrong?" You have a choice, even if it does not feel like it at first. You can follow that thought, imagining different scenarios, worrying about possible outcomes, and building more anxiety around it. Or you can notice the thought, acknowledge its presence, and gently shift your attention to something else, such as your breath, your surroundings, or what you are doing in the present moment. The thought may still be there for a while, but without your attention, it loses its strength. This does not mean that you ignore important thoughts or avoid dealing with real problems. It means that you stop giving unnecessary attention to thoughts that do not serve you, especially those that create fear, doubt, and overthinking without offering any real solution. You begin to use your attention more consciously, choosing where to place it, instead of letting it be pulled in every direction by your mind. At first, this practice may feel difficult because your attention has been trained to follow your thoughts automatically. You may find yourself getting pulled into thinking again and again, even when you try to focus on something else. This is normal, and it does not mean you are failing. Each time you notice that your attention has drifted and bring it back, you are strengthening your ability to direct it. Over time, this becomes easier, and your attention becomes more stable. Another important aspect of this truth is understanding that attention shapes your experience of reality. What you focus on determines how you feel, how you think, and how you see the world. If your attention is constantly on problems, your life will feel full of problems. If your attention is always on what is missing, you will feel incomplete. But if your attention is grounded in the present moment, in what is actually happening, you begin to experience more clarity and calmness. This is why practices like mindfulness are so powerful, because they train your attention to stay in the present instead of being lost in thoughts about the past or future. When you focus on your breath, your body, or your surroundings, you are not trying to control your thoughts, but simply giving your attention a place to rest. This reduces the influence of unnecessary thinking, because your attention is no longer feeding it. Over time, you begin to realize that your mind does not need to be controlled for you to feel peaceful. Thoughts can come and go without disturbing you, as long as you are not constantly engaging with them. This creates a sense of freedom, because you are no longer dependent on having a perfectly quiet mind. Instead, you develop the ability to remain calm even when your mind is active, because you are not giving every thought your attention. This shift also changes the way you handle difficult emotions. When you feel anxious or stressed, your attention often goes to the thoughts that are causing those feelings, which makes them stronger. But when you shift your attention to the present moment, to your breathing, or to what you can actually do right now, the intensity of those emotions begins to decrease. You are no longer feeding the cycle of thought and emotion, and this allows the feeling to pass more naturally. As this understanding deepens, you begin to trust your ability to guide your attention instead of trying to control your mind. You realize that you do not need to stop every negative thought, because thoughts are not the problem. The problem is the constant attention you give to them. When you reduce that attention, you reduce their power. In the end, you begin to see your mind in a completely different way. Instead of something that needs to be controlled, it becomes something that you can observe and work with. Thoughts are no longer commands that you must follow, but options that you can choose to engage with or let go of. Your attention becomes your tool, allowing you to shape your experience without fighting against your mind. The truth is simple, but it takes time to fully understand. You do not control your thoughts, but you do control where your attention goes. And when you learn to guide your attention with awareness, patience, and consistency, you begin to experience a level of calm and clarity that does not depend on your thoughts being perfect, but on your ability to not be controlled by them. 12. Peace is already within you, the truth you keep overlooking. There is something deeply misunderstood about peace, something that most people spend their entire lives searching for, without realizing that what they are looking for has never actually been missing. From a very young age, you are taught, directly or indirectly, that peace is something you must achieve, something that exists somewhere in the future, waiting for you once your life is finally in order, once your problems are solved, once your mind becomes calm, and once everything around you is exactly the way you want it to be. This belief creates a constant sense of chasing, as if peace is a destination that you have not yet reached, a reward that will come only after you have fixed everything that feels wrong. Because of this, you begin to build conditions for your peace. You tell yourself that you will feel calm once your situation improves, once people treat you better, once your goals are achieved, or once your mind stops producing negative thoughts. You begin to believe that peace depends on external circumstances or internal perfection, and as long as those conditions are not met, peace feels out of reach. This creates a cycle where you are always waiting, always striving, and always postponing your sense of calm for a future moment that never fully arrives. Buddhism reveals a truth that challenges this entire way of thinking, and that truth is simple but profound. Peace is not something you create, and it is not something you find outside of yourself. It is something that already exists within you, beneath the constant activity of your mind. It is not absent, it is simply hidden, covered by layers of thoughts, emotions, and mental noise that you have become so used to that you mistake them for your normal state. If you take a moment to observe your experience carefully, you may begin to notice something subtle, which is that your mind is rarely still. There is almost always some form of thinking happening, some form of mental commentary, some form of analyzing, remembering, or imagining. This constant activity creates the impression that your mind is never at rest, and because of this, it feels as if peace is something that needs to be created by stopping this activity. But the truth is that peace is not the result of forcing your mind to be quiet. It is what remains when you are no longer completely absorbed in your thoughts. When you become aware of your thoughts, instead of being lost in them, you begin to experience a small gap, a moment where you are simply observing rather than reacting. In that moment, there is a sense of stillness, a quiet presence that is not disturbed by the movement of your thinking. This presence is always there, but it is often overlooked because your attention is constantly pulled into your thoughts. The more you identify with your thinking, the more distant you feel from this natural state of peace. One of the reasons this truth is difficult to see is because your mind is conditioned to believe that something is always missing. It constantly searches for problems, looks for what is wrong, and focuses on what needs to be fixed. This creates a feeling of incompleteness, as if you are not yet where you should be. Even when things are going well, your mind may still find something to worry about, something to improve, or something to think about. This habit keeps you in a state of subtle dissatisfaction, always looking forward, always trying to reach a better state. However, when you step out of this constant movement of thinking, even briefly, you begin to see that in this moment, without adding any extra thoughts, there is nothing lacking. There is a simple sense of being, a quiet awareness that does not need anything to be different in order to feel complete. This does not mean that your life is perfect or that you have no responsibilities, but it means that beneath all the activity of your mind, there is a stable presence that is not affected by every passing thought or situation. The difficulty is not that peace is unavailable, but that your attention is constantly directed away from it. Every time you get lost in overthinking, every time you become attached to a thought, and every time you react automatically to your emotions, you move further away from this underlying stillness. It is not because it disappears, but because you are no longer aware of it. It becomes hidden behind the noise of your mind. When you begin to practice awareness, something starts to shift. You are no longer trying to force peace, but simply noticing what is already there. You start to see that even in moments of difficulty, there is a part of you that is observing, a part that is not completely overwhelmed. This observing presence is not anxious, not stressed, and not caught in the same way your thoughts are. The more you connect with this presence, the more you begin to experience a sense of calm that does not depend on your thoughts being perfect. This understanding also changes the way you approach your thoughts and emotions. Instead of seeing them as obstacles that must be removed before you can feel peaceful, you begin to see them as temporary experiences that do not define your deeper state. Thoughts can come and go, emotions can rise and fall, and situations can change, but the awareness that notices all of this remains stable. This awareness is where peace resides, not in the absence of thought, but in the absence of identification with thought. Over time, you begin to realize that you have been overlooking this peace, not because it was hidden in a complicated way, but because it was too simple. Your mind is used to complexity, to searching, to solving, and to doing, so it overlooks what is already present and does not require effort. Peace does not demand that you achieve something. It only requires that you stop constantly moving away from what is already here. This does not mean that you stop working on your life, pursuing goals, or improving yourself. It means that you no longer depend on those things to feel complete. You can take action, make changes, and grow, but from a place of inner stability rather than constant dissatisfaction. You are no longer chasing peace as something outside of you, but recognizing it as something that is always available within you. There will still be moments when you get lost in your thoughts, when you feel overwhelmed, and when you forget this truth. This is natural, and it is part of being human. The practice is not to avoid these moments, but to remember again, to return to awareness, and to reconnect with that quiet presence within you. Each time you do this, you strengthen your connection to that inner peace. In the end, you begin to see that peace was never something you needed to create, achieve, or find. It was always there, waiting beneath the noise, beneath the thinking, and beneath the constant movement of your mind. And the more you learn to observe rather than react, to be present rather than lost in thought, and to allow rather than resist, the more this peace becomes not just something you experience occasionally, but something that becomes the foundation of how you live your life. The truth is not that peace is far away, but that it is so close, so simple, and so constant that it has been overlooked all along. 13. Stop resisting life, the truth of acceptance. There is a quiet resistance that lives inside most people, a constant inner tension that often goes unnoticed because it has become such a normal part of their experience, and that resistance is the refusal to fully accept life as it is. It does not always appear in obvious ways, but it shows itself in subtle thoughts, in small frustrations, in moments of impatience, and in the silent belief that something should be different from how it is right now. This resistance can be directed toward situations, toward other people, or even toward yourself. And it creates a continuous sense of unease, as if you are always in conflict with reality. From a very early age, you are conditioned to believe that happiness comes from changing your circumstances, from fixing what is wrong, and from creating a life that matches your expectations. While there is nothing wrong with improving your life or working toward your goals, this conditioning often leads to a deeper problem, which is the inability to accept what is already happening in the present moment. You begin to believe that acceptance means giving up, that it means being passive, or that it means allowing things to stay the same. Because of this misunderstanding, you resist acceptance, thinking that it will make you weak or prevent you from making progress. However, Buddhism teaches that acceptance is not the opposite of change, but the foundation of it. Acceptance does not mean that you approve of everything that happens, or that you stop taking action. It means that you stop fighting reality in your mind. It means that you recognize what is happening without immediately reacting with resistance, judgment, or denial. This shift may seem small, but it changes everything, because the moment you stop resisting what is already happening, you remove a layer of unnecessary suffering. When something does not go the way you expect, your mind reacts almost instantly. It says, "This should not be happening," or "This is not how things were supposed to be," or "I need this to change immediately." These thoughts create tension because they are in direct conflict with reality. The situation is already happening, but your mind is rejecting it, creating a gap between what is and what you believe should be. This gap is where suffering begins, because you are not only dealing with the situation itself, but also with your resistance to it. For example, if you are stuck in traffic, the situation itself is neutral. It is simply what is happening in that moment. But your mind may react with frustration, impatience, and anger, thinking about how you are wasting time or how things should be moving faster. This reaction does not change the situation, but it adds emotional stress on top of it. If you were able to accept the situation as it is, without adding resistance, the experience would be completely different, not necessarily enjoyable, but much more peaceful. This same pattern applies to deeper situations in life. When you experience loss, disappointment, or unexpected change, your mind may resist what has happened, wishing that things were different or that the situation had not occurred. This resistance prolongs your suffering because you are holding on to a version of reality that no longer exists. Acceptance, in this context, does not mean that you do not feel pain or that you do not care. It means that you allow yourself to acknowledge what has happened without denying it or fighting against it in your mind. One of the most powerful aspects of acceptance is that it creates clarity. When you stop resisting a situation, you are able to see it more clearly without the distortion of emotional reaction. This clarity allows you to respond more effectively because you are no longer acting from a place of frustration or denial. You can make decisions, take action, and move forward, but from a place of understanding rather than resistance. Resistance, on the other hand, often keeps you stuck. When you refuse to accept what is happening, you remain focused on how things should be instead of dealing with how they are. This can prevent you from taking the necessary steps to move forward because your energy is being used to fight reality instead of working with it. Acceptance frees that energy, allowing you to use it in a more constructive way. Another important aspect of this truth is accepting yourself. Many people are in constant resistance toward their own thoughts, emotions, and imperfections. They criticize themselves for feeling a certain way, judge themselves for their mistakes, and try to force themselves to be different. This creates an internal conflict where you are constantly at odds with yourself, never fully at ease with who you are in the present moment. Acceptance of yourself does not mean that you stop growing or that you ignore your flaws. It means that you stop rejecting yourself as you are right now. It means that you recognize your current state without judgment, allowing yourself to be human, to make mistakes, and to experience a range of emotions. This creates a sense of inner peace, because you are no longer fighting against your own existence. As you begin to practice acceptance, you may notice that your experience of life becomes less intense in a negative way. Situations that once triggered strong reactions begin to feel more manageable, not because they have changed, but because your relationship to them has changed. You are no longer adding resistance to what is already happening, and this reduces the overall level of stress and tension in your life. It is important to understand that acceptance is not something you achieve once and then maintain perfectly. There will be moments when you resist, when you react, and when you find yourself in conflict with reality. This is natural, and it is part of the process. The practice is to notice this resistance when it arises and gently return to acceptance again and again. Over time, this practice becomes more natural, and you begin to experience a deeper sense of ease. You realize that life does not need to be perfect for you to feel at peace, and that much of your suffering was coming from the constant effort to control what cannot be controlled. You begin to trust the flow of life more, allowing things to unfold without trying to force every outcome. In the end, you come to understand that acceptance is not about giving up, but about letting go of the unnecessary struggle that comes from resisting what is already happening. It is about aligning yourself with reality instead of fighting against it, and in doing so, you create space for peace, clarity, and meaningful action. The truth is that life is always moving, always changing, and often unpredictable. You cannot control everything that happens, but you can choose how you relate to it. And when you choose acceptance over resistance, you begin to experience life in a way that is not defined by constant struggle, but by a quiet sense of understanding and flow. 14. You are not broken, the truth of wholeness. There is a silent belief that many people carry deep within themselves, often without fully realizing it, and that belief is the feeling that something is wrong with them, that they are incomplete, damaged, or somehow not enough as they are. This belief does not always appear as a clear thought, but it shows itself in subtle ways, in the constant need to improve, in the fear of being judged, in the habit of comparing yourself to others, and in the quiet voice that tells you that you need to become something more before you can finally feel at peace. Over time, this belief becomes part of your identity, shaping how you see yourself and how you move through life. You may try to fix this feeling by achieving more, by becoming better, by gaining approval, or by changing different aspects of your life, believing that once you reach a certain point, this sense of incompleteness will disappear. But no matter how much progress you make, the feeling often returns, because it is not created by your external circumstances, but by the way you relate to yourself internally. You are not just trying to grow, you are trying to fix what you believe is broken, and this belief creates a constant sense of pressure, as if you are always trying to become someone you are not yet. Buddhism offers a different perspective, one that challenges this belief at its core, and that is the understanding that you are not broken, not incomplete, and not fundamentally flawed. What you experience as confusion, anxiety, overthinking, or emotional pain is not a sign that something is wrong with your nature, but a reflection of patterns in your mind that have been shaped over time. These patterns can change, they can evolve, and they can be understood, but they do not define your essence. If you look closely at your experience, you will notice that everything you feel and think is constantly changing. Your emotions rise and fall, your thoughts come and go, and your state of mind shifts from moment to moment. This means that what you are experiencing is not fixed, and therefore cannot define who you truly are. The problem arises when you identify with these temporary experiences, believing that they represent your identity. When you feel anxious, you think, "I am an anxious person." When you make a mistake, you think, "I am a failure." These thoughts create a narrative that reinforces the belief that something is wrong with you. However, when you begin to observe these experiences with awareness, you start to see that they are not permanent and they are not who you are. They are simply experiences that are happening within you, influenced by your past, your environment, and your current state. Beneath all of this, there is a deeper presence, an awareness that is not broken, not incomplete, and not affected in the same way by the constant movement of your thoughts and emotions. This awareness is often overlooked because your attention is constantly drawn to what is changing, to your thoughts, your feelings, and your experiences. You become so focused on these temporary states that you forget to notice the stable presence that is observing them. This presence does not judge, does not criticize, and does not feel incomplete. It simply exists, quietly and consistently, beneath the surface of your thinking. When you begin to connect with this awareness, your relationship with yourself starts to change. You no longer see yourself as a problem that needs to be fixed, but as a being that is experiencing different states. This creates a sense of acceptance because you are no longer rejecting parts of yourself or trying to eliminate certain experiences. Instead, you allow them to be there without letting them define you. This does not mean that you stop growing or that you become passive. Growth is still a natural and important part of life, but it no longer comes from a place of self-rejection. Instead of trying to become better because you feel inadequate, you grow because you are curious, because you want to understand yourself, and because you want to express your potential. This shift removes the pressure of needing to fix yourself and replaces it with a more natural and sustainable form of growth. Another important aspect of this truth is understanding that your struggles are part of the human experience, not a sign that you are uniquely flawed. Everyone experiences moments of doubt, fear, confusion, and difficulty. These experiences do not mean that something is wrong with you. They mean that you are human. When you see this clearly, you stop isolating yourself in your struggles and begin to develop a sense of compassion for yourself. Self-compassion plays a crucial role in this process because it allows you to treat yourself with kindness instead of criticism. When you make a mistake, instead of attacking yourself, you acknowledge it and learn from it. When you feel overwhelmed, instead of judging yourself, you give yourself space to process your emotions. This creates an inner environment where you feel supported rather than attacked, which makes it easier to navigate challenges and continue growing. Over time, this shift in perspective leads to a deeper sense of inner stability. You are no longer constantly trying to prove your worth or fix yourself, because you understand that your worth is not dependent on your thoughts, your emotions, or your achievements. It is something that is already present, something that does not need to be earned or validated by external factors. This understanding also changes the way you relate to others. When you no longer see yourself as broken, you are less likely to compare yourself to others or seek validation from them. You begin to see others as individuals who are also navigating their own experiences rather than as standards you need to measure up to. This reduces feelings of jealousy, insecurity, and competition, creating a more peaceful and balanced way of relating to people. There will still be moments when old patterns return, when you feel inadequate, when you doubt yourself, or when you fall back into familiar ways of thinking. This is natural, and it does not mean that you have lost your progress. These patterns have been developed over time, and it takes patience and awareness to change them. The practice is not to eliminate these moments, but to recognize them when they arise and gently return to the understanding that you are not defined by them. Each time you do this, you weaken the belief that you are broken and strengthen the understanding of your wholeness. This process is gradual, but it is powerful because it changes the foundation of how you see yourself. Instead of building your identity on changing thoughts and emotions, you begin to rest in a deeper sense of being that is not affected in the same way. In the end, you come to realize that the idea of being broken was never a truth, but a belief that was created and reinforced over time. It was shaped by experiences, by comparisons, by expectations, and by the way you learn to interpret your thoughts and emotions. When you see this clearly, the belief begins to lose its power, and you begin to experience yourself in a different way. You are not something that needs to be fixed, completed, or perfected. You are already whole, already enough, and already capable of experiencing peace, even if your mind sometimes tells you otherwise. And the more you return to this understanding, the more it becomes a natural part of how you live your life, not as an idea, but as a direct experience. The truth is simple, but it takes time to fully see it. You were never broken. You were only lost in the belief that you were. 16. Nothing outside will complete you the truth of inner fulfillment. There is a quiet belief that shapes the direction of most people's lives, a belief so deeply embedded that it often goes unnoticed, and that belief is the idea that something outside of you will finally make you feel complete. It may appear in different forms, sometimes as the desire for success, sometimes as the search for the right relationship, sometimes as the need for recognition, validation, or approval, and sometimes as the pursuit of money, status, or security. No matter how it appears, the underlying assumption remains the same, that once you achieve, obtain, or experience a certain thing, you will finally feel whole, satisfied, and at peace. This belief creates a constant movement toward the future, a feeling that you are always one step away from where you need to be, always chasing something that promises fulfillment, but never quite delivers it in a lasting way. When you reach a goal, there is a brief moment of satisfaction, a temporary sense of completion, but it does not last. Soon after, the mind finds something else to pursue, another goal, another desire, another expectation. This creates a cycle where you are always seeking, always striving, and always postponing your sense of fulfillment for a future moment that keeps shifting further away. Buddhism reveals a truth that challenges this entire pattern, and that truth is that nothing outside of you can provide lasting fulfillment, because the feeling you are searching for is not something that can be created by external conditions. This does not mean that external things have no value or that you should not pursue your goals, but it means that they cannot give you what you are ultimately looking for, which is a deep and stable sense of completeness. If you observe your experience carefully, you may begin to notice that every time you achieve something you once desired, the satisfaction it brings is temporary. The excitement fades, the novelty wears off, and your mind begins to look for the next thing. This is not because there is something wrong with what you achieved, but because the sense of fulfillment you are seeking is not contained within that achievement. It is something deeper, something that cannot be sustained by external changes alone. The problem is not desire itself, but the belief that fulfillment depends on fulfilling those desires. When you attach your sense of completeness to external outcomes, you create a dependency where your inner state is constantly influenced by what happens outside of you. This makes your peace unstable, because external conditions are always changing, always uncertain, and often beyond your control. When things go well, you may feel satisfied, but when they do not, you feel incomplete, frustrated, or disappointed. This creates a constant fluctuation in your inner state, where your sense of fulfillment rises and falls based on circumstances. Over time, this can lead to a deeper sense of emptiness, because no matter how much you achieve or acquire, it never feels like enough. Buddhism teaches that true fulfillment does not come from adding more to your life, but from understanding your relationship with what you already have. It comes from recognizing that the sense of lack you feel is not caused by the absence of something external, but by the way your mind is constantly searching, comparing, and expecting more. This constant movement of wanting creates the illusion that something is missing, even when your basic needs are met. When you begin to observe this pattern, you start to see that the feeling of incompleteness is not a fixed reality, but a mental state that arises from your thoughts. It is not that you are lacking something essential, but that your mind is telling you that you are. This realization creates a shift, because instead of trying to fill the sense of lack with external things, you begin to question the belief that something is missing in the first place. This does not mean that you stop setting goals or pursuing things that matter to you. It means that your sense of fulfillment is no longer dependent on achieving those goals. You can work toward what you want, but from a place of wholeness rather than from a place of lack. You are no longer trying to complete yourself, but expressing yourself. As you deepen this understanding, you begin to experience a different kind of contentment, one that is not based on external achievements, but on your relationship with the present moment. You start to appreciate what is already here, rather than constantly focusing on what is missing. This appreciation does not come from forcing gratitude, but from seeing clearly that the constant search for more has been creating unnecessary dissatisfaction. Another important aspect of this truth is how it affects your relationships. When you believe that someone else will complete you, you place a heavy expectation on them, expecting them to fulfill your emotional needs and make you feel whole. This can create dependency, pressure, and disappointment, because no person can fully provide what you are looking for. When you approach relationships from a place of inner fulfillment, you no longer need someone to complete you, but you can share your life with them in a more balanced and genuine way. This shift also reduces fear, because much of your fear comes from the idea that losing something external will leave you incomplete. When you understand that your fulfillment does not depend on external conditions, you become less afraid of change, less attached to outcomes, and more open to the natural flow of life. You are no longer holding on to things out of fear, but engaging with them from a place of freedom. There will still be moments when the mind returns to old patterns, when it starts searching, comparing, and wanting more. This is natural, because these patterns have been reinforced over time. The practice is to notice when this happens and gently return to the present moment, to the awareness that nothing essential is missing right now. Each time you do this, you weaken the habit of seeking fulfillment outside and strengthen your connection to what is already within you. Over time, this understanding becomes more stable, and you begin to live in a different way. You still take action, still pursue your goals, and still engage with the world, but your inner state is no longer dependent on the outcome. You are no longer chasing fulfillment because you recognize that it is already present. In the end, you come to realize that the sense of completeness you have been searching for was never something that needed to be created or obtained. It was always there, beneath the constant movement of desire, beneath the endless search for more. And the more you let go of the belief that something outside of you will complete you, the more you begin to experience a quiet, stable sense of fulfillment that does not depend on anything changing. The truth is simple but deeply transformative. Nothing outside of you can complete you because you were never incomplete to begin with. 17. Surrender control, the truth of letting life flow. There is a quiet tension that most people carry within themselves, a constant effort to manage, control, predict, and shape every aspect of their lives in order to feel safe, stable, and at peace. This tension is often so familiar that it feels normal, as if it is simply the way life is meant to be lived. You try to control your future by planning every detail. You try to control people by expecting certain behaviors. You try to control situations by imagining different outcomes, and you even try to control your own thoughts and emotions, believing that if everything could just align perfectly, you would finally feel calm and secure. At first, this desire for control seems reasonable because it gives you a sense of direction and responsibility. It makes you feel like you are actively shaping your life rather than leaving it to chance. But over time, this need for control becomes a source of stress because life does not move according to your expectations. No matter how much you plan, things can change. No matter how much you try to control outcomes, uncertainty remains. And no matter how much you try to manage your thoughts, your mind continues to produce ideas, fears, and possibilities that are beyond your direct control. This creates a constant internal struggle because you are trying to hold on to something that is naturally unstable. Life is not fixed, it is constantly changing, constantly unfolding in ways that cannot be fully predicted or controlled. When you resist this reality, when you try to force life into a specific shape, you create tension within yourself because you are moving against the natural flow of things. Buddhism teaches a different approach, one that does not reject action or responsibility, but shifts your relationship with control. It teaches the practice of surrender, not as a form of giving up, but as a way of aligning yourself with the reality of how life actually works. Surrender does not mean that you stop trying, that you become passive, or that you abandon your goals. It means that you let go of the illusion that you can control everything and instead learn to move with life rather than against it. When you begin to understand this, you start to see how much of your stress comes from trying to control things that are not within your control. You cannot control how others think or behave. You cannot control every outcome, and you cannot control every thought that arises in your mind. The more you try to control these things, the more frustrated and exhausted you become, because you are fighting against something that cannot be fully managed. Surrendering control begins with recognizing the difference between what you can influence and what you cannot. You can take action, make decisions, and respond to situations, but you cannot guarantee specific results. You can express yourself honestly, but you cannot control how others will react. You can create plans, but you cannot predict every outcome. When you accept this reality, you begin to release the pressure of needing everything to go a certain way. This shift does not make you weak, it makes you more effective, because you are no longer wasting energy on things that are outside your control. Instead, you focus on what you can actually do in the present moment, taking action where it is possible and letting go where it is not. This creates a sense of clarity, because you are no longer overwhelmed by trying to manage everything at once. One of the most powerful aspects of surrender is how it changes your relationship with uncertainty. Much of your anxiety comes from the need to know what will happen, to have certainty about the future, and to feel secure in your plans. But life does not offer complete certainty, and trying to create it only leads to more stress. When you surrender control, you begin to accept uncertainty as a natural part of life, rather than something that needs to be eliminated. This acceptance reduces fear, because you are no longer trying to predict every possible outcome. Instead, you trust your ability to respond to whatever happens. You realize that you do not need to have everything figured out in advance, because you can handle situations as they arise. This creates a deeper sense of confidence, not based on control, but on adaptability. Surrender also affects the way you relate to your thoughts and emotions. When you try to control your mind, you often create more resistance, because the more you push against certain thoughts or feelings, the stronger they become. But when you allow your thoughts and emotions to exist without trying to control them completely, they begin to move more naturally. You are no longer trapped in a cycle of resistance, and this reduces the intensity of your inner experience. Another important aspect of this truth is letting go of the need for everything to be perfect. The desire for control is often connected to the desire for perfection, the belief that things must be a certain way for you to feel at peace. This creates constant pressure, because perfection is not something that can be maintained in a changing world. When you surrender this need, you allow life to be imperfect, and in doing so, you create space for a more relaxed and authentic experience. As you continue to practice surrender, you begin to notice a different way of moving through life. Instead of forcing outcomes, you allow things to unfold. Instead of resisting challenges, you face them with openness. Instead of holding on to rigid expectations, you remain flexible and responsive. This does not mean that life becomes easier in every situation, but it means that you are no longer adding unnecessary tension on top of what is already happening. There will still be moments when you try to control things, when you feel the urge to manage every detail, and when you resist what is happening. This is natural, because the habit of control is deeply ingrained. The practice is to notice this tendency when it arises and gently return to surrender again and again. Each time you do this, you weaken the habit of control and strengthen your ability to flow with life. Over time, this understanding becomes more natural, and you begin to experience a deeper sense of ease. You realize that life does not need to be controlled for you to feel stable, and that much of your stress was coming from the constant effort to manage what cannot be managed. You begin to trust the process of life more, allowing things to unfold without trying to force every outcome. In the end, you come to understand that surrender is not about losing control, but about releasing the illusion that you ever had complete control to begin with. It is about recognizing that life is always moving, always changing, and always unfolding in ways that cannot be fully predicted. When you stop resisting this movement, you begin to experience a sense of flow, where you are not fighting against life, but moving with it. The truth is that you do not need to control everything to be at peace. You only need to let go of the need to. And when you do, you begin to experience life in a way that is not defined by constant tension, but by a quiet sense of trust, presence, and freedom. 18. Nothing is personal, the truth of ego illusion. There is a hidden lens through which most people experience their lives, a lens so subtle and deeply ingrained that it feels completely natural. And that lens is the tendency to take everything personally. Every word, every action, every reaction from others is often interpreted as being about you, as if the world is constantly responding to your identity, your worth, or your value. This creates a constant emotional sensitivity where small situations begin to carry unnecessary weight, where a simple comment can feel like an attack, and where silence or distance from others can be interpreted as rejection. This pattern does not arise because people are intentionally trying to hurt you, but because the mind is constantly filtering experiences through the idea of a fixed self, an identity that needs to be protected, validated, and maintained. This is what Buddhism refers to as the illusion of the ego, not as something that does not exist at all, but as something that is not as solid or as central as it appears. The ego is a collection of thoughts, memories, and beliefs about who you are, and it constantly tries to interpret everything in relation to that identity. When someone speaks in a certain tone, your mind may immediately interpret it as disrespect. When someone does not respond the way you expect, your mind may interpret it as rejection. When someone disagrees with you, your mind may interpret it as a personal attack. In each of these situations, the event itself is neutral, or at least not entirely personal, but your mind turns it into something about you. This creates emotional reactions that are often stronger than the situation itself requires. The truth is that most of what people say and do is not about you, but about them, their thoughts, their emotions, their experiences, and their own internal struggles. Everyone is living in their own mental world, shaped by their past, their beliefs, and their current state of mind. When someone reacts in a certain way, it is often a reflection of what is happening within them, not a reflection of your worth or your identity. However, because the ego is always seeking to protect itself, it interprets these actions as personal. It creates stories about what others think of you, what their actions mean, and how you should feel about them. These stories feel real, but they are often based on assumptions rather than actual understanding. This creates unnecessary suffering, because you are reacting not just to what happened, but to the meaning your mind has attached to it. When you begin to see this clearly, something starts to change. You begin to question the automatic interpretations your mind creates. Instead of immediately assuming that something is about you, you pause and consider that it may not be. You begin to see that your emotional reactions are not always caused by the situation itself, but by the way you are interpreting it. This does not mean that you ignore your feelings or that you allow others to treat you poorly. It means that you create space between what happens and how you interpret it. In that space, you are able to respond more clearly without being driven by automatic assumptions or emotional reactions. You are no longer reacting to imagined meanings, but to actual reality. One of the most powerful effects of this understanding is that it reduces the emotional weight of many situations. Things that once felt personal and intense begin to feel lighter, because you are no longer carrying the assumption that everything is about you. A comment becomes just a comment, not a judgment of your worth. A disagreement becomes just a difference of perspective, not an attack. A moment of silence becomes just silence, not rejection. This shift also changes the way you see others. When you stop taking things personally, you begin to see that others are also dealing with their own thoughts, emotions, and struggles. You realize that just as you have moments of stress, confusion, or distraction, so do they. This creates a sense of empathy, because you are no longer seeing others as sources of validation or threat, but as individuals navigating their own experiences. Another important aspect of this truth is how it frees you from the constant need for approval. When you believe that everything is personal, you often seek validation from others to confirm your worth. You want people to like you, to agree with you, and to respond in ways that make you feel accepted. But when you understand that others' reactions are not entirely about you, this need begins to weaken. You no longer depend on external responses to define how you feel about yourself. This creates a deeper sense of independence because your self-worth is no longer tied to how others behave. You can express yourself more freely without constantly worrying about how you are being perceived. You can interact with others without feeling the need to control their reactions. This does not make you indifferent, but it makes you less dependent on external validation. There will still be moments when your mind takes things personally, when you feel hurt, or when you react emotionally to a situation. This is natural because the habit of ego-based thinking is deeply ingrained. The practice is not to eliminate these reactions completely, but to notice them when they arise and gently question them. Each time you do this, you weaken the automatic tendency to take things personally and strengthen your ability to see more clearly. Over time, this understanding becomes more natural, and you begin to move through life with less emotional reactivity. You are no longer as affected by every comment, every reaction, or every situation. You are able to remain more stable because your sense of self is no longer tied to external events in the same way. In the end, you come to realize that much of your suffering was not caused by what others did, but by the way your mind interpreted their actions. When you let go of the need to make everything about you, you free yourself from a significant source of unnecessary pain. The truth is simple, but deeply freeing. Most things are not personal, and the more you understand this, the more you are able to live with clarity, calmness, and emotional freedom. 19. You become what you repeat, the truth of mental conditioning. There is a quiet process happening inside your mind every single day, a process so consistent and so subtle that most people never stop to notice it, yet it shapes almost every part of who you are, how you think, how you feel, and how you experience your life. This process is repetition. The thoughts you think repeatedly, the emotions you revisit again and again, and the patterns you follow over time slowly begin to define your mental and emotional state. Without realizing it, you are training your mind through what you repeat, and over time, these repetitions become habits that feel automatic, natural, and difficult to change. When you wake up in the morning and your mind immediately begins to worry, when you replay the same negative memories throughout the day, when you constantly think about what could go wrong, or when you repeatedly doubt yourself, you are not just having random thoughts, you are reinforcing patterns. Each time you think a thought, you strengthen the pathway associated with it, making it easier for that thought to appear again in the future. This is how your mind becomes conditioned, not by a single experience, but by what you return to over and over again. At first, these patterns may seem small, almost insignificant, but over time they begin to build. A single negative thought may not have much impact, but when that thought is repeated hundreds or thousands of times, it starts to feel like a truth. It begins to shape how you see yourself, how you interpret situations, and how you respond to life. This is why someone who constantly thinks, "I am not good enough," may begin to believe it deeply, even if there is no objective evidence to support it. The repetition creates familiarity, and familiarity creates belief. Buddhism teaches that the mind is not fixed, but conditioned, which means that it is shaped by what you repeatedly experience and focus on. This is both a challenge and an opportunity. It is a challenge because it means that many of your current patterns have been built over time and may feel difficult to change. But it is also an opportunity because it means that these patterns are not permanent. Just as they were created through repetition, they can be transformed through new patterns of awareness and attention. One of the most important realizations you can have is that you are not just experiencing your thoughts, you are practicing them. Every time you engage with a thought, every time you follow it, analyze it, or react to it, you are reinforcing that pattern. This means that your mind is constantly being trained, whether you are aware of it or not. If you repeatedly engage with negative thinking, you are training your mind to become more negative. If you repeatedly focus on fear, you are training your mind to become more fearful. However, the moment you become aware of this process, something begins to shift. You start to see that your thoughts are not random or meaningless, but part of a pattern that you have been reinforcing over time. This awareness gives you the ability to interrupt the cycle. When a familiar negative thought appears, instead of automatically following it, you can notice it, recognize it as a pattern, and choose not to engage with it in the same way. This does not mean that the thought will disappear immediately or that you will never experience it again. It means that you are no longer feeding it with the same level of attention and repetition. Over time, this weakens the pattern because it is no longer being reinforced. At the same time, you can begin to introduce new patterns, not by forcing yourself to think differently, but by gently redirecting your attention toward more constructive and balanced ways of thinking. For example, instead of repeatedly focusing on what is wrong, you can begin to notice what is present. Instead of constantly replaying past mistakes, you can bring your attention to what you can do in the present moment. Instead of assuming the worst about the future, you can acknowledge uncertainty without immediately turning it into fear. These shifts may seem small, but when repeated over time, they begin to create new patterns in your mind. Another important aspect of mental conditioning is understanding that your emotional responses are also shaped by repetition. If you repeatedly react to situations with anger, your mind becomes more likely to respond with anger in the future. If you repeatedly respond with anxiety, anxiety becomes your default reaction. This is not because these emotions define you, but because they have been practiced over time. The good news is that just as negative patterns can be strengthened through repetition, they can also be softened and transformed through new patterns of response. When you begin to respond differently, even in small ways, you start to change the conditioning of your mind. This requires patience, because patterns that have been built over years do not change instantly, but with consistent awareness and practice, they begin to shift. One of the challenges in this process is that your mind will often try to return to familiar patterns, even if they are not helpful. This is because familiarity feels comfortable, even when it creates suffering. Your mind prefers what it knows, even if it is negative, because it is predictable. This is why change can feel uncomfortable at first, because you are stepping out of familiar patterns into something new. When you understand this, you become more patient with yourself. You realize that the discomfort of change is not a sign that something is wrong, but a natural part of the process. Each time you choose not to follow an old pattern, you are creating space for a new one. Each time you bring awareness to your thoughts, you are weakening automatic conditioning and strengthening conscious choice. Over time, this practice begins to transform your experience. Thoughts that once felt overwhelming begin to lose their intensity. Emotional reactions that once felt automatic begin to feel more manageable. You start to experience more space between your thoughts and your responses, allowing you to choose how you engage with your mind rather than being controlled by it. This does not mean that your mind becomes perfect or that you never experience negative thoughts again. It means that you are no longer defined by those patterns. You are no longer repeating them unconsciously. Instead, you are aware of them, and in that awareness, you have the ability to change your relationship with them. In the end, you begin to realize that who you are is not determined by a single thought or a single moment, but by the patterns you repeat over time. And when you bring awareness to those patterns, you gain the ability to reshape them. You are not stuck in the way your mind currently operates, because your mind is not fixed. It is flexible, responsive, and constantly changing. The truth is simple but powerful. You become what you repeat, and when you begin to choose your patterns with awareness, patience, and consistency, you begin to shape your mind in a way that supports clarity, calmness, and inner freedom. 20. Wake up from the mind, the truth of inner awakening. There comes a moment, sometimes quiet and subtle, sometimes intense and undeniable, when you begin to question the way you have been experiencing your life. It may not come all at once, and it may not feel like a dramatic realization, but something begins to shift in the background of your awareness. You start to notice that much of your suffering is not coming from what is happening around you, but from what is happening within you, from the constant movement of your thoughts, from the endless interpretations your mind creates, and from the automatic reactions that follow those thoughts without question. For most of your life, you have been living inside your mind without realizing it. Every thought that appears feels real, every emotion feels personal, and every story your mind tells feels like the truth. You move from one thought to another, from one reaction to another, without ever stepping back to see what is actually happening. This creates a kind of unconscious living, where your experience is shaped by patterns that you did not choose, patterns that have been built over time through repetition, conditioning, and habit. Waking up from the mind does not mean that your thoughts disappear or that your life suddenly becomes free of challenges. It means that you begin to see your thoughts for what they are, not as absolute truths, but as mental events that arise and pass within your awareness. This shift is subtle, but it is profound, because it creates a separation between you and your thinking. You are no longer completely identified with every thought, and this allows you to experience your mind in a completely different way. When you are fully identified with your mind, every thought feels urgent, important, and meaningful. A single negative idea can shape your entire mood. A small worry can turn into hours of overthinking, and a memory can pull you back into emotions that feel just as real as when the event first happened. In this state, you are not observing your thoughts. You are living inside them, reacting to them as if they are reality itself. However, the moment awareness enters the picture, you begin to see that thoughts are not as solid as they seem. You notice that they appear on their own, without your control, and that they change constantly. One moment you may feel confident, and the next moment you may feel doubtful. One moment your mind is calm, and the next moment it is busy and restless. This constant change reveals something important, which is that your thoughts are not stable and therefore cannot define who you are. As you begin to observe your thoughts, you create space. In that space, you are no longer immediately reacting to everything your mind produces. You are able to see a thought without following it, to notice an emotion without being overwhelmed by it, and to experience a situation without adding unnecessary layers of interpretation. This is the beginning of waking up, not in a dramatic sense, but in a quiet and steady way, where you begin to see your experience more clearly. One of the most important aspects of this awakening is recognizing how much of your suffering comes from unconscious thinking. When you are not aware, your mind creates stories about the past and the future, and you become emotionally involved in those stories as if they are happening right now. You worry about things that have not happened, you replay things that are already over, and you carry these mental experiences as if they are part of your current reality. This creates a sense of heaviness, because you are not just living in the present moment, you are carrying the weight of your thoughts. When you wake up from the mind, you begin to see these patterns more clearly. You notice how your mind creates problems that do not exist in the present moment, how it turns simple situations into complex narratives, and how it keeps you stuck in cycles of overthinking. This awareness does not require you to force your mind to stop, but it allows you to see that you do not have to follow every thought that appears. This is where true freedom begins, not in controlling your mind, but in no longer being controlled by it. You realize that you have been giving your thoughts more importance than they deserve, treating them as if they are always true, always relevant, and always worth your attention. But when you step back and observe them, you begin to see that many of them are repetitive, unnecessary, and disconnected from what is actually happening in the present moment. Another important part of this awakening is recognizing the difference between thinking and awareness. Thinking is the activity of the mind, the constant movement of thoughts, ideas, and interpretations. Awareness, on the other hand, is the space in which those thoughts appear. It is the part of you that notices, that observes, and that remains present even as your thoughts change. When you are lost in thinking, you are not aware of this distinction. You are completely absorbed in your thoughts, and your experience is shaped by them. But when you become aware, you begin to see that your thoughts are happening within something larger, within a presence that is not affected in the same way. This presence is calm, stable, and always available, even when your mind is busy. As you deepen this awareness, you begin to experience life in a different way. Situations that once triggered strong reactions begin to feel more manageable because you are no longer adding layers of thought on top of them. You are able to respond more clearly because you are seeing what is actually happening rather than reacting to what your mind is imagining. This creates a sense of clarity and calmness that does not depend on your thoughts being perfect. Waking up from the mind is not a one-time event, but an ongoing process. There will still be moments when you get lost in your thoughts, when you react automatically, and when you forget this awareness. This is natural because the habit of identifying with your mind has been built over time. The practice is not to avoid these moments, but to notice them when they happen and gently return to awareness. Each time you do this, you strengthen your ability to remain present. Each time you observe your thoughts instead of following them, you deepen your understanding of how your mind works. Over time, this becomes more natural, and you begin to spend more time in awareness rather than in unconscious thinking. In the end, you come to realize that waking up from the mind is not about becoming someone new, but about seeing clearly what has always been there. It is about recognizing that you are not the constant stream of thoughts, but the awareness in which those thoughts appear. This awareness is not limited, not controlled by every thought, and not defined by every emotion. The truth is simple, but it takes time to fully understand. You have been living inside your mind, but you are not your mind. And the moment you begin to see this clearly, even in small moments, you begin to wake up, not from life, but from the illusion that your thoughts are who you are. And in that awakening, you begin to experience a freedom that is not dependent on changing your thoughts, but on no longer being controlled by them. 21. You are the observer, the truth of pure awareness. There is a realization that changes everything once it is truly seen. Not as an idea, not as something you intellectually understand, but as something you directly experience within yourself. And that realization is this: you are not the voice in your head, you are not the thoughts that come and go, and you are not even the emotions that rise and fall within you. You are the one who is aware of all of it, the silent observer that has been present through every moment of your life, even when you were not aware of it. For most of your life, you have been living from the perspective of your thoughts. Whatever your mind says, you believe. Whatever your mind feels, you identify with. When a thought appears, you do not question it, you become it. When an emotion arises, you do not observe it, you are consumed by it. This creates a state where your entire experience is shaped by what is happening in your mind. And because your mind is constantly changing, your sense of self becomes unstable, shifting from one state to another without a clear center. However, if you pause for a moment and look carefully at your experience, you may begin to notice something subtle, something that has always been there but has gone unnoticed. You may notice that there is a part of you that is aware of your thoughts. You can hear the voice in your head, which means that you are not that voice, because the one who hears is different from what is being heard. You can notice your emotions, which means that you are not those emotions, because the one who observes is different from what is being observed. This distinction may seem simple, but it is deeply transformative because it shifts your identity from the content of your experience to the awareness of it. Instead of being lost in your thoughts, you begin to see them. Instead of being overwhelmed by your emotions, you begin to observe them. This creates a space within you, a separation between you and what is happening in your mind, and in that space, something new becomes possible. When you begin to experience yourself as the observer, your relationship with your thoughts starts to change. Thoughts still arise, just as they always have, but they no longer have the same power over you. You see them as passing events, not as absolute truths. You notice how they come and go, how they change, and how they do not stay. This realization weakens their hold on you, because you are no longer completely identified with them. The same is true for your emotions. When you are fully identified with an emotion, it feels overwhelming, as if it defines your entire experience. But when you observe it, you begin to see that it is something that is happening within you, not something that you are. You can feel it fully without being consumed by it. You can allow it to rise and fall without resisting it or trying to control it. This creates a sense of stability because you are no longer at the mercy of every emotional wave that passes through you. One of the most powerful aspects of this understanding is that the observer itself does not change in the same way your thoughts and emotions do. Your thoughts may be chaotic, your emotions may be intense, and your circumstances may be uncertain, but the awareness that notices all of this remains steady. It does not react, it does not judge, and it is not affected in the same way by what it observes. It simply sees. This is why connecting with this awareness creates a sense of peace that is different from the peace you may have experienced before. It is not dependent on your thoughts being quiet or your emotions being calm. It is present even when your mind is active, because it exists beneath the activity of your thinking. The more you rest in this awareness, the more you begin to experience a stable sense of presence that is not easily disturbed. At first, this may feel unfamiliar, because you are used to identifying with your thoughts. You may find yourself getting pulled back into thinking, reacting automatically, and forgetting to observe. This is natural, because the habit of identification has been built over time. The practice is not to avoid this, but to notice it when it happens and gently return to awareness. Each time you notice a thought instead of becoming it, you strengthen your connection to the observer. Each time you observe an emotion, instead of reacting to it, you deepen your awareness. Over time, this becomes more natural, and you begin to spend more time in this state of observation rather than in unconscious reaction. Another important realization is that the observer is always present, even when you are not aware of it. It has been there through every experience you have ever had, through every thought, every emotion, and every moment of your life. It is not something you create, but something you recognize. The more you turn your attention toward it, the more familiar it becomes. This understanding also changes the way you relate to challenges. When something difficult happens, your mind may still react, creating thoughts and emotions around the situation. But instead of being completely overwhelmed, you are able to observe what is happening within you. This creates a sense of clarity, because you are no longer lost in the reaction. You can see both the situation and your response to it, which allows you to respond more consciously. Over time, this awareness begins to influence every part of your life. You become less reactive because you are no longer automatically following every thought. You become more present because your attention is not constantly pulled into mental activity. You become more stable because your sense of self is no longer based on changing thoughts and emotions. It is important to understand that this does not mean you stop thinking or feeling. Thoughts and emotions are natural parts of being human, and they will continue to arise. The difference is that you are no longer controlled by them. You are able to experience them without being defined by them. There will still be moments when you forget, when you get caught in your thoughts, and when you feel overwhelmed. This is part of the process, and it does not mean that you have lost your awareness. It simply means that your attention has been pulled back into identification. The practice is to notice this and return, again and again, without judgment. As you continue this practice, something begins to shift more deeply. You start to feel less like a collection of thoughts, and more like a presence that is observing them. You begin to experience a sense of inner space, where thoughts and emotions can arise without overwhelming you. You begin to feel a kind of quiet stability that is not dependent on external conditions. In the end, you come to realize that you have always been the observer, but you were too identified with your thoughts to notice it. You are living inside the content of your mind, forgetting that you are the one who is aware of that content. The truth is simple, but it changes everything. You are not your thoughts, you are not your emotions, and you are not the stories your mind tells. You are the awareness that sees them all, the observer that remains when everything else changes. And when you begin to live from this awareness, even in small moments, you begin to experience a kind of freedom that is not dependent on controlling your mind, but on no longer being controlled by it. 22. Stop escaping yourself the truth of inner avoidance. There is a quiet habit that most people carry without ever fully recognizing it, a habit that shapes their choices, their routines, and even the direction of their lives. And that habit is the constant attempt to escape themselves. It does not always look obvious, and it rarely feels like avoidance in the moment, but it appears in subtle ways, in the need to stay busy, in the urge to distract yourself, in the endless scrolling, in the constant consumption of content, and in the quiet discomfort you feel when there is nothing to occupy your attention. Whenever you find it difficult to sit with yourself without reaching for something to fill the silence, you are touching the edge of this pattern. Most people believe they are escaping boredom, loneliness, or stress, but in reality, they are often escaping the experience of being with their own thoughts and emotions without distraction. When the mind becomes quiet and there is nothing external to focus on, thoughts begin to surface, feelings begin to arise, and a deeper layer of experience becomes visible. For many, this can feel uncomfortable because it reveals what has been pushed aside, ignored, or avoided. Instead of facing this directly, the mind looks for ways to move away from it, to stay occupied, to stay distracted, and to stay disconnected from what is happening within. This avoidance creates a cycle where you never fully understand yourself, because you are always moving away from your inner experience instead of turning toward it. You may try to solve your problems externally, changing your environment, your circumstances, or your routines, but the underlying patterns remain because they have not been fully seen or understood. The more you avoid yourself, the more unfamiliar your inner world becomes, and the more uncomfortable it feels to be alone with your own mind. Buddhism teaches that true understanding and peace do not come from escaping your experience, but from turning toward it with awareness. This does not mean forcing yourself into discomfort, but allowing yourself to be present with what is already there, without immediately trying to change it, fix it, or run away from it. It is the willingness to sit with your thoughts, to feel your emotions, and to observe your inner state without distraction. When you begin to do this, you may notice how quickly your mind tries to escape. You may feel the urge to check your phone, to think about something else, or to distract yourself in any way possible. This urge is not random. It is the mind trying to avoid discomfort. But if you stay with the experience, even for a few moments, you begin to see that the discomfort is not as overwhelming as it seemed. It rises, it changes, and it eventually passes. This is one of the most important realizations, that what you are avoiding is often not as intense or as permanent as your mind makes it seem. The fear of facing your thoughts and emotions is often greater than the experience itself. When you allow yourself to be present with what you feel, you begin to understand it, and in that understanding, the intensity begins to decrease. Another important aspect of this truth is recognizing how avoidance keeps patterns in place. When you do not face your thoughts and emotions, they remain unexamined, and because they are unexamined, they continue to influence your behavior in unconscious ways. You may find yourself reacting in certain patterns, feeling the same emotions repeatedly, or making similar decisions without understanding why. This is because the underlying causes have not been fully seen. When you stop escaping and begin to observe your inner experience, you start to notice these patterns. You see how certain thoughts lead to certain emotions, how certain emotions lead to certain reactions, and how these patterns repeat over time. This awareness gives you the ability to step out of these patterns because you are no longer operating unconsciously. This does not mean that the process is always easy. There will be moments when sitting with yourself feels uncomfortable, when thoughts feel overwhelming, or when emotions feel intense. This is natural, because you are facing something that you have been avoiding. The key is not to force yourself or to judge the experience, but to approach it with curiosity and patience, allowing it to unfold without resistance. As you continue this practice, something begins to change. You become more familiar with your inner world, more comfortable with your thoughts, and more accepting of your emotions. You begin to feel less need to escape, because being with yourself no longer feels threatening. Instead, it becomes a space of understanding, where you can observe, reflect, and connect with yourself more deeply. This shift also changes the way you relate to external distractions. You may still use them, still enjoy them, and still engage with the world, but you are no longer dependent on them to avoid yourself. You can be alone without feeling restless, quiet without feeling uncomfortable, and still without feeling the need to escape. This creates a sense of independence, because your sense of peace is no longer tied to constant activity or distraction. Another important realization is that facing yourself is not about finding something wrong, but about understanding what is already there. It is not about fixing yourself, but about seeing clearly. When you observe your thoughts and emotions without judgment, you begin to see that they are not problems to be solved, but experiences to be understood. This understanding creates a sense of ease because you are no longer fighting against yourself. Over time, this practice deepens your awareness and strengthens your ability to remain present, even in moments of discomfort. You begin to trust that you can handle your inner experience, that you do not need to run away from it, and that you can stay with it until it changes naturally. This trust creates a sense of stability, because you are no longer afraid of your own mind. There will still be moments when you fall back into avoidance, when you distract yourself, and when you move away from your experience. This is part of the process, and it does not mean that you have failed. The practice is to notice this tendency and gently return to awareness again and again. Each time you do this, you weaken the habit of avoidance and strengthen your ability to be present with yourself. In the end, you come to realize that the thing you were trying to escape was never your enemy. It was simply a part of your experience that needed to be seen, understood, and accepted. When you stop running from yourself, you begin to discover a deeper sense of connection, not with something outside, but with your own presence. The truth is simple, but deeply transformative. You do not need to escape yourself to feel at peace. You only need to be willing to meet yourself fully, exactly as you are, without distraction, without resistance, and without the need to be anywhere else. And in that willingness, you begin to find a quiet, steady sense of peace that was always available, waiting beneath the need to escape. 23. You are not your past, the truth of psychological freedom. There is a powerful illusion that quietly shapes how most people see themselves and their lives, and that illusion is the belief that their past defines who they are in the present. It is not always expressed directly, but it appears in subtle ways, in the way you think about yourself, in the limitations you place on your potential, and in the stories you repeat about what you have been through. Your mind constantly refers back to what has already happened, using past experiences as evidence for who you are, what you are capable of, and what you can expect from the future. If you have experienced failure, your mind may tell you that you are someone who fails. If you have been rejected, your mind may tell you that you are not worthy. If you have made mistakes, your mind may create a narrative that you are flawed or incapable. These stories feel real, not because they are absolute truths, but because they are repeated so often that they become familiar. Over time, you begin to live as if these stories define you, shaping your actions, your decisions, and your expectations. Buddhism teaches that this identification with the past is one of the main sources of psychological limitation, because it keeps you tied to experiences that are no longer happening. Your past exists only as memory, as a collection of thoughts and images that your mind brings into the present. Yet, when you identify with these memories, you give them power over your current experience, allowing them to shape how you see yourself and how you respond to life. The truth is that the past is not something you are living in, it is something you are remembering. It does not exist as a fixed reality in the present moment, but as a mental representation that changes each time you think about it. When you recall a memory, you are not experiencing the actual event, but your interpretation of it, influenced by your current state of mind, your emotions, and your perspective. This means that your understanding of the past is not as solid as it feels, and therefore cannot fully define who you are. However, when you are not aware of this, your mind treats these memories as absolute truths. It creates a continuous narrative, connecting past events to your identity and reinforcing the idea that you are the same person who experienced those situations. This creates a sense of limitation because you begin to believe that your future will be shaped by your past rather than by your present awareness and actions. When you begin to observe this process, something starts to change. You notice how often your thoughts refer back to the past, how they replay certain events, and how they create stories about what those events mean. You begin to see that these thoughts are not neutral, but interpretations, shaped by your perspective. This awareness creates distance, because you are no longer completely identified with the story. Instead of saying, "This happened to me, so this is who I am," you begin to see that this is a memory, and this is the meaning I am giving to it. This shift is subtle, but it is powerful, because it allows you to question the assumptions your mind has created. You begin to see that your identity is not fixed, but fluid, constantly changing, and influenced by your awareness in the present moment. One of the most important aspects of this realization is understanding that you are not the same person you were in the past. Your thoughts have changed, your experiences have changed, and your perspective has evolved. Yet, when you identify with the past, you hold on to an outdated version of yourself, limiting your ability to grow and change. You carry old labels, old beliefs, and old interpretations into the present, even when they no longer serve you. When you let go of this identification, you begin to experience a sense of psychological freedom. You are no longer bound by the stories of your past, and you are no longer defined by what has already happened. This does not mean that you forget your past or deny your experiences, but that you change your relationship with them. You see them as part of your history, not as the definition of your identity. This shift also changes the way you approach mistakes and challenges. Instead of seeing them as evidence of your limitations, you begin to see them as experiences that you have learned from. You no longer carry the same emotional weight because you are not attaching your identity to those events. This creates a sense of openness where you are more willing to take risks, try new things, and step outside of familiar patterns. Another important aspect of this truth is how it affects your emotional state. When you are constantly thinking about the past, you may find yourself reliving emotions that are no longer relevant to your current situation. You may feel guilt, regret, or sadness, not because those things are happening now, but because your mind is bringing those memories into the present. This creates unnecessary suffering because you are reacting to something that is not actually occurring. When you bring your attention back to the present moment, you begin to see that these emotions are connected to thoughts about the past, not to your current reality. This awareness allows those emotions to lose their intensity because you are no longer feeding them with constant attention. You begin to experience your life as it is now, rather than through the filter of what has already happened. This does not mean that you ignore the past or avoid reflecting on it. Reflection can be valuable, but it is different from identification. Reflection involves learning and understanding, while identification involves attaching your identity to what has happened. When you reflect without identifying, you gain insight without limiting yourself. There will still be moments when your mind returns to the past, when it replays old memories, and when it brings up familiar emotions. This is natural because these patterns have been reinforced over time. The practice is not to eliminate these thoughts completely, but to notice them when they arise and gently return to the present moment. Each time you do this, you weaken the habit of identifying with the past and strengthen your connection to the present. Over time, this understanding becomes more natural, and you begin to experience yourself in a different way. You are no longer carrying the weight of your past in the same way, and you are no longer limited by the stories your mind has created. You begin to see that your identity is not something fixed, but something that is constantly unfolding. In the end, you realize that the past has only as much power as you give it. It is not something that defines you, but something that you can learn from and move beyond. You are not the sum of your past experiences. You are the awareness that is experiencing the present moment. The truth is simple, but deeply freeing. You are not your past, and the more you understand this, the more you are able to live with openness, flexibility, and a sense of possibility that is not limited by what has already happened. 24. You don't need to fix everything. The truth of inner ease. There is a silent pressure that lives inside most people, a constant sense that something needs to be improved, corrected, or fixed before they can finally feel calm, stable, and at peace. This pressure is not always obvious, but it shows itself in the way you think about your life, in the way you approach your problems, and in the way you relate to yourself. There is always something that feels incomplete, something that feels like it needs attention, something that your mind tells you must be resolved before you can truly relax. This creates a mindset where life becomes a series of problems to solve, where your attention is constantly directed toward what is wrong, what is missing, and what needs to change. You begin to believe that peace is something that comes after everything is fixed, after every issue is resolved, after your thoughts are quiet, and after your emotions are stable. Until then, you remain in a state of subtle tension, always working, always thinking, always trying to improve your situation. At first, this may seem like a responsible and productive way to live, because it motivates you to grow and take action. But over time, it becomes exhausting, because there is always something else to fix. Even when you solve one problem, your mind quickly moves on to another, creating a continuous cycle of effort without a sense of completion. You may achieve things, improve aspects of your life, and make progress, but the feeling of needing to fix something never fully disappears. Buddhism offers a different perspective, one that challenges this constant need for fixing and introduces a deeper understanding of peace. It teaches that not everything needs to be solved immediately, and that much of the pressure you feel comes from the belief that your current state is not acceptable as it is. This belief creates resistance, because you are constantly pushing against your present experience, trying to turn it into something else. The truth is that many of the things you try to fix are not actual problems, but mental interpretations of what should be different. Your mind creates a sense of urgency around these interpretations, making it feel as if something must be done right now. But if you pause and look closely, you may begin to see that not everything requires immediate action. Some things need time, some things need understanding, and some things do not need to be changed at all. When you stop trying to fix everything, something begins to shift. You start to notice the difference between what truly requires action and what is simply a product of your mind's tendency to create problems. This awareness reduces unnecessary effort, because you are no longer reacting to every thought or feeling as if it demands a solution. Instead, you begin to respond more selectively, focusing your energy where it is actually needed. One of the most important aspects of this truth is understanding that your thoughts and emotions do not always need to be fixed. When you feel anxious, your instinct may be to eliminate the anxiety as quickly as possible. When you feel sad, you may try to change your mood immediately, but this approach often creates more tension because you are resisting what you are experiencing. The more you try to force your state to change, the more you reinforce the idea that your current state is unacceptable. When you allow your thoughts and emotions to exist without immediately trying to fix them, you create space. In that space, the intensity of your experience begins to decrease because you are no longer adding resistance to it. You begin to see that many thoughts and emotions are temporary and that they change on their own when you do not interfere with them. This realization reduces the need to constantly control your inner state. This does not mean that you ignore real problems or avoid taking action when it is necessary. There are situations in life that require attention, decisions that need to be made, and challenges that need to be addressed. The key difference is that you approach these situations with clarity rather than urgency, with understanding rather than resistance. You act when action is needed, but you do not carry the constant pressure of needing to fix everything at once. Another important aspect of this truth is how it changes your relationship with yourself. When you believe that you need to fix everything, you often apply that belief to your own identity. You see yourself as something that needs improvement, something that is not yet complete, and something that must be changed before you can feel at ease. This creates a constant sense of self-criticism, where you are always evaluating yourself and finding something that needs to be corrected. When you let go of this need, you begin to see yourself differently. You are no longer a problem to be solved, but a person who is experiencing different states, thoughts, and emotions. You allow yourself to be as you are, without constantly trying to change every aspect of your experience. This creates a sense of acceptance because you are no longer fighting against yourself. As this understanding deepens, you begin to experience a different kind of peace, one that is not dependent on everything being perfect or everything being resolved. You realize that peace is not something that comes after fixing everything, but something that is available even when things are not fully resolved. This does not mean that you stop caring or that you become passive, but that you stop attaching your sense of peace to the condition of your life. Over time, this shift reduces the overall tension in your life. You are no longer constantly scanning for problems, no longer reacting to every thought, and no longer trying to control every aspect of your experience. You begin to move through life with a sense of ease, because you are not carrying the weight of needing to fix everything. There will still be moments when your mind returns to old patterns, when it starts creating problems, and when you feel the urge to fix everything at once. This is natural, because the habit of problem-solving has been reinforced over time. The practice is to notice this tendency and gently return to a more balanced perspective, where you recognize that not everything requires immediate action. Each time you do this, you weaken the habit of constant fixing and strengthen your ability to remain at ease. You begin to trust that life can unfold without you needing to control every detail, and that many things resolve themselves when you allow them to. In the end, you come to realize that much of your stress was not caused by your circumstances, but by the constant effort to change them. When you let go of the need to fix everything, you create space for clarity, for natural movement, and for a deeper sense of calm. The truth is simple, but deeply freeing. You do not need to fix everything to feel at peace. You only need to stop believing that you do. And when you do, you begin to experience life with a sense of ease that was always available, waiting beneath the constant need to change what is already here. 25. Nothing lasts the truth that sets you free. There is a truth that exists beneath every experience you have ever had. A truth that is always present, always unfolding, and always shaping the nature of your life. yet it is often ignored because the mind does not want to fully accept it. And that truth is this: nothing lasts. Every thought you think, every emotion you feel, every situation you go through, every relationship you experience, and every phase of your life is temporary, constantly changing, constantly moving, and constantly dissolving into something new. At first, this truth may feel uncomfortable because the mind prefers stability, certainty, and permanence. It wants things to stay the way they are when they feel good, and it wants things to disappear immediately when they feel painful. This creates a constant struggle where you try to hold on to what you like and push away what you do not like. You become attached to moments of happiness, afraid of losing them, and resistant to moments of discomfort, wishing they would end as quickly as possible. This constant grasping and resisting creates tension within you because you are trying to control something that cannot be controlled. Life is always moving, always changing, and no experience can be held in place forever. When you try to make something permanent that is naturally temporary, you create suffering because you are moving against the natural flow of reality. Think about a moment when you felt truly happy, a moment when everything seemed to be going well and you wanted that feeling to last forever. Even in that moment, there may have been a subtle fear in the background, a quiet awareness that it would not last. This fear can take away from the experience, because instead of fully enjoying the moment, you are already thinking about losing it. This is the paradox of attachment. The more you try to hold on to something, the more you become aware of its impermanence, and the more anxiety you create. In the same way, when you experience something painful, your mind reacts as if it will last forever. A difficult emotion, a challenging situation, or a moment of suffering can feel permanent, as if it defines your entire experience. In those moments, it is easy to forget that just as happiness does not last forever, neither does pain. Everything changes, even when it feels like it will not. Buddhism teaches that understanding impermanence is not something to fear, but something that brings freedom. When you truly see that nothing lasts, your relationship with your experiences begins to change. You stop trying to hold on to things so tightly because you understand that they are not meant to stay. You stop resisting change so strongly because you recognize that change is the nature of life. This understanding does not make you indifferent or disconnected, but it allows you to experience life more fully. When you know that a moment is temporary, you appreciate it more deeply. You are more present, more aware, and more engaged because you are not taking it for granted. You allow yourself to experience joy without clinging to it, and you allow yourself to experience pain without being overwhelmed by it. One of the most powerful effects of this truth is how it reduces fear. Much of your fear comes from the belief that certain experiences will last forever, that pain will not end, that failure will define you, or that loss will leave you permanently incomplete. When you see clearly that everything is temporary, this fear begins to weaken. You realize that no matter what you are going through, it is part of a process that is already changing. This does not mean that you stop caring about your life or your experiences, but that you stop trying to control their duration. You allow things to come and go naturally without forcing them to stay or pushing them away. This creates a sense of ease because you are no longer in constant conflict with the nature of reality. Another important aspect of this truth is how it applies to your identity. Many people believe that they are fixed in a certain way, that they are always anxious, always overthinking, or always stuck in certain patterns. But just like everything else, your identity is also changing. The person you were in the past is not the same person you are now, and the person you are now will continue to evolve. This means that no matter how stuck you feel, change is always possible because nothing about you is permanent. When you begin to understand this, you stop limiting yourself based on your past experiences. You realize that your thoughts, your emotions, and your behaviors are not fixed traits, but patterns that can change over time. This creates a sense of possibility, because you are no longer defined by what you have been, but open to what you can become. At the same time, this truth also helps you let go of unnecessary attachments. When you understand that nothing lasts, you stop clinging to people, situations, or outcomes as if they define your happiness. You still care, you still connect, and you still engage, but you do so with a sense of openness rather than attachment. You allow relationships to evolve, situations to change, and life to unfold without trying to control every outcome. This does not mean that you become detached in a cold or distant way, but that you develop a deeper form of connection, one that is not based on possession or control, but on presence and understanding. You appreciate what is there while it is there, without needing it to stay forever. There will still be moments when you forget this truth, when you hold on too tightly, when you resist change, and when you feel overwhelmed by your experiences. This is natural because the habit of attachment is deeply ingrained. The practice is to remember again, to return to the understanding that everything is changing, and to allow your experience to move naturally. Each time you do this, you create a little more space within yourself, a little more ease, and a little more freedom. You begin to trust the flow of life, not because everything is perfect, but because you understand that everything is temporary. In the end, you come to see that impermanence is not something to fear, but something that makes life meaningful. It is what allows new experiences to arise, what allows growth to happen, and what allows change to occur. Without it, life would be static and unchanging, but because of it, life is dynamic and full of possibility. The truth is simple, but deeply liberating. Nothing lasts, and when you truly accept this, you stop trying to control what cannot be controlled. You begin to live with more presence, more appreciation, and more freedom, because you are no longer holding on to what is already moving. And in that understanding, you discover a kind of peace that does not come from making things permanent, but from allowing them to pass. 26. Your mind creates the prison, the truth of self-imposed suffering. There is a realization that can feel both unsettling and deeply liberating at the same time, and that realization is this: much of the suffering you experience is not imposed on you by the world, but created within you by the way your mind interprets, reacts to, and holds on to your experiences. This does not mean that life is always easy or that pain does not exist, but it reveals something deeper, which is that suffering is often not just about what happens, but about how your mind processes what happens. From the moment you wake up to the moment you fall asleep, your mind is constantly active, interpreting everything around you, forming judgments, creating expectations, and building stories about your life. These interpretations feel real because they happen so quickly and automatically that you rarely question them. A situation occurs, and almost instantly, your mind assigns meaning to it, deciding whether it is good or bad, whether it benefits you or threatens you, and what it says about you or your future. This process is so continuous that it becomes invisible. You do not see the interpretation as separate from reality, you see it as reality itself. When something goes wrong, your mind does not just register the event, it creates a narrative around it, adding layers of meaning, prediction, and emotional weight. It says, "This should not have happened," or "This always happens to me," or "This means something is wrong." These thoughts do not simply describe the situation, they shape how you experience it. This is where the prison begins to form, not in the external situation, but in the internal narrative. The more you engage with these thoughts, the more real they feel, and the more they influence your emotions. A single event can turn into hours or days of overthinking, not because the event is still happening, but because your mind keeps replaying it, analyzing it, and adding new interpretations to it. This creates a cycle where your suffering is no longer tied to the original event, but to the ongoing activity of your mind. Buddhism teaches that this cycle is not something that is forced upon you, but something that you participate in, often without realizing it. This may feel uncomfortable at first, because it challenges the idea that your suffering is entirely caused by external factors. But it is also empowering, because it means that you are not completely at the mercy of your circumstances. If your mind is involved in creating your suffering, then understanding your mind becomes the key to reducing that suffering. One of the most important aspects of this truth is recognizing how your mind creates resistance. When something happens that you do not like, your mind reacts by rejecting it, wishing it were different, and trying to push it away. This resistance adds an extra layer of tension to the situation, because you are not only dealing with what has happened, but also with your rejection of it. This creates a sense of conflict, where you are fighting against reality instead of working with it. For example, if something unexpected disrupts your plans, the situation itself may be inconvenient, but manageable. However, your mind may react by becoming frustrated, thinking about how things should have gone differently, and replaying the situation repeatedly. This reaction amplifies the experience, turning a simple inconvenience into a source of stress. The suffering does not come only from the situation, but from the way your mind is responding to it. Another way your mind creates a prison is through attachment. When you become attached to certain outcomes, expectations, or ideas about how things should be, you create a dependency where your sense of well-being is tied to those conditions being met. When things go according to your expectations, you may feel satisfied, but when they do not, you feel disappointed or upset. This creates a cycle of emotional highs and lows, where your state is constantly influenced by external conditions. The problem is not that you have preferences or goals, but that you attach your sense of peace to them. When you believe that you need things to be a certain way in order to feel okay, you create vulnerability, because life is unpredictable and constantly changing. The more attached you are, the more you suffer when things do not go as planned. Your mind also creates a prison through identification. When you believe that your thoughts and emotions define who you are, you become trapped in them. A negative thought is no longer just a thought, it becomes part of your identity. A difficult emotion is no longer just an experience, it becomes something that defines your state. This creates a sense of limitation, because you begin to see yourself through the lens of your current thoughts and feelings. However, when you begin to observe your mind, you start to see that these patterns are not fixed. Thoughts come and go, emotions rise and fall, and situations change. This means that what you are experiencing is not permanent, and therefore cannot fully define you. This realization creates space, because you are no longer completely identified with your mental activity. As you deepen this awareness, you begin to see how your mind operates, how it creates narratives, how it reacts to situations, and how it reinforces certain patterns. This understanding does not require you to stop your thoughts or eliminate your emotions, but it allows you to see them clearly. When you see them clearly, you are no longer automatically controlled by them. This is where the prison begins to open. You start to recognize that you do not have to follow every thought, that you do not have to react to every emotion, and that you do not have to believe every story your mind creates. You begin to respond more consciously, choosing how to engage with your experience instead of being driven by automatic patterns. This does not mean that you become detached from life or that you stop caring about your experiences. It means that you engage with life from a place of awareness rather than from a place of unconscious reaction. You still experience thoughts and emotions, but they no longer have the same power over you because you are not feeding them in the same way. There will still be moments when you get caught in your mind, when you react automatically, and when you feel trapped in your thoughts. This is natural, because these patterns have been reinforced over time. The practice is to notice when this happens and gently return to awareness. Each time you do this, you weaken the patterns that create the prison and strengthen your ability to remain free from them. Over time, this understanding becomes more natural, and you begin to experience a different kind of freedom. You are no longer trapped by your thoughts, no longer overwhelmed by your emotions, and no longer defined by your interpretations. You begin to see that while your mind can create a prison, it can also be understood, and in that understanding, it loses its ability to control you in the same way. In the end, you realize that the prison was never outside of you, it was created within your own mind. And while this may seem like a difficult truth at first, it is also the key to your freedom, because what is created within can also be understood, transformed, and released. The truth is simple, but deeply powerful. Your mind can create suffering, but it does not have to control you. And the moment you begin to see this clearly, you begin to step out of the prison and into a life of greater awareness, clarity, and inner freedom. 27. You already have what you're searching for, the final truth of inner realization. There is a quiet search that has been guiding your life for as long as you can remember, even if you have never clearly defined it. A search for something that feels like it is missing, something that you believe will finally bring you peace, clarity, and a sense of completion. This search may take many forms, sometimes appearing as the pursuit of success, sometimes as the desire for love or recognition, sometimes as the need to fix your thoughts or emotions, and sometimes as the hope that one day everything will finally make sense. No matter how it appears, the underlying feeling remains the same, that something is not quite complete, and that you must find it somewhere outside or sometime in the future. Because of this, your life becomes a movement toward something, always reaching, always trying, always searching. You believe that if you can just think the right way, feel the right way, achieve the right things, or create the right circumstances, you will finally arrive at a place where everything feels settled. This belief creates a constant sense of distance between where you are and where you think you need to be, and this distance becomes the source of subtle dissatisfaction that never fully disappears. Even when you achieve something you once desired, the satisfaction is often temporary. There may be a moment of relief, a brief sense of completion, but it does not last. Soon after, the mind begins searching again, creating new goals, new desires, and new expectations. This creates a cycle where you are always moving forward, always chasing, but never fully arriving. It feels as if the answer is always just beyond your reach, always one step further than where you are now. Buddhism reveals a truth that completely transforms this pattern, a truth that is simple but deeply challenging to accept. And that truth is this: what you are searching for is not something you need to find, because it is already present within you. The sense of peace, clarity, and completeness that you are seeking is not something that exists in the future, not something that depends on your circumstances, and not something that needs to be created. It is something that is already here, but it has been overlooked because your attention has been constantly directed outward and forward. The difficulty is not that this truth is hidden in a complicated way, but that it is too simple for the mind to accept. Your mind is used to searching, to solving, to doing, and to achieving. It believes that if something is valuable, it must require effort, progress, and time. Because of this, it overlooks what is already present, what does not need to be created, and what does not require you to become something different. If you pause for a moment and look at your experience right now, without adding any extra thoughts, you may begin to notice something subtle. Beneath the movement of your thinking, beneath the constant activity of your mind, there is a quiet awareness that is simply present. It is not trying to become anything, not trying to achieve anything, and not lacking anything. It is just there, steady, calm, and unaffected by the constant flow of thoughts and emotions. This awareness is what you have been searching for, not as an object or a goal, but as the foundation of your experience. It has always been there, through every moment of your life, even when you were not aware of it. It is the part of you that notices your thoughts, that observes your emotions, and that remains present regardless of what is happening in your mind or in your life. The reason it has been overlooked is because your attention has been captured by the content of your experience, by your thoughts, your emotions, your desires, and your fears. You have been so focused on what is happening within your mind that you have not noticed the awareness in which it is all happening. This creates the illusion that something is missing, because you are looking for something outside of the very place where it already exists. When you begin to shift your attention from the content of your mind to the awareness itself, something begins to change. You start to see that the sense of incompleteness you have been feeling is not coming from a lack of something real, but from the constant movement of your thoughts, always searching, always comparing, always expecting more. When this movement slows down, even briefly, you begin to experience a sense of completeness that is not dependent on anything external. This does not mean that your thoughts disappear or that your life becomes perfect. It means that you are no longer dependent on changing your thoughts or your circumstances in order to feel at peace. You begin to realize that peace is not something you achieve, but something you uncover when you are not lost in the activity of your mind. As this understanding deepens, your relationship with your desires begins to change. You may still have goals, still want to grow, and still take action, but you are no longer chasing fulfillment in the same way. You are not trying to complete yourself through external achievements, but expressing yourself from a place of inner completeness. This creates a different kind of motivation, one that is not driven by lack, but by clarity and presence. Another important aspect of this truth is how it transforms your experience of the present moment. When you are constantly searching, the present moment feels like a stepping stone to something else, something better that is yet to come. But when you realize that what you are looking for is already here, the present moment becomes complete in itself. You are no longer waiting for something to happen in order to feel at ease, because you recognize that the sense of ease is already available. There will still be moments when your mind returns to old patterns, when it starts searching again, when it creates the feeling that something is missing. This is natural, because the habit of searching has been reinforced over time. The practice is to notice this movement and gently return to awareness again and again. Each time you do this, you weaken the illusion of lack and strengthen your connection to what is already present. Over time, this understanding becomes more stable, and you begin to live in a different way. You are no longer constantly chasing something outside of yourself, and you are no longer dependent on future outcomes for your sense of peace. You are able to engage with life fully, take action, and pursue your goals, but from a place of inner completeness rather than from a place of lack. In the end, you come to realize that the search itself was based on a misunderstanding, the belief that something was missing when, in reality, nothing essential was ever absent. You were not incomplete, you were simply unaware of what was already within you. The truth is simple, but it changes everything. You already have what you are searching for. And the moment you stop looking for it outside, the moment you stop postponing it for the future, and the moment you turn your attention inward, you begin to experience a sense of peace, clarity, and completeness that was always there, waiting to be recognized. There comes a moment, not loud, not dramatic, but deeply quiet, where everything you have been trying to understand begins to settle within you, not as knowledge, but as a realization. You start to see that nothing you were searching for was ever outside of you, and nothing that felt like a problem was ever as solid as it seemed. The struggle was never life itself, but the way your mind was constantly interpreting, resisting, and trying to control it. You spent so much time trying to fix your thoughts, trying to become someone better, trying to reach a place where everything finally feels right, without realizing that the peace you were chasing was always present, hidden beneath the noise of your own thinking. Every lesson you have just gone through is not something new you need to become, but something you need to remember, something you need to see clearly enough that it begins to change how you experience your life. You begin to understand that thoughts are not truth, that emotions are not permanent, that your past does not define you, and that your mind is not something you need to fight. You see that control was never the answer, that resistance was creating more suffering, and that the more you tried to escape yourself, the further you moved away from the peace that was already within you. And, in this understanding, something softens inside you. The pressure begins to dissolve. The need to fix everything begins to fade. The constant search begins to slow down. You start to feel a quiet sense of ease, not because your life has suddenly become perfect, but because you are no longer in conflict with it. This is where everything changes, not because the world changes, but because the way you see it changes. You begin to live with more awareness, more presence, and more clarity. You stop reacting to every thought, stop holding on to every emotion, and stop believing every story your mind creates. You begin to move through life with a sense of space, where experiences come and go, but you remain grounded. There will still be moments of confusion, moments of difficulty, and moments when you forget everything you have learned. This is part of being human. But now you know something you did not know before, that you can always return. Return to awareness. Return to the present moment. Return to yourself. And each time you return, even in the smallest way, you reconnect with something that has always been there, something calm, something steady, something untouched by the constant movement of your mind. In the end, you realize that this was never about becoming someone new. It was about seeing clearly what has always been true. And once you see it, even for a moment, you can never completely unsee it. That is the beginning of real freedom.